Hey everybody, Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. All right, so we got a love letter to our fans who have been following us and paying attention to our in jokes for several years, like the sick bastards that all of us are. A love letter to boxing, a love letter to Bobby Czyz. Yeah, dude, we got a funny, quirky, ridiculous show today. Definitely history oriented, but my boy Brin-Jonathan Butler and I are here to reveal the Bobby Czyz shirt. Blame Bobby. We are here. We are live. We are Bobby Czyz. Just pour one for our boy. Maybe I might have slipped a little bit of a fireball into my coffee here. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? Special occasion, Bryn.
For Bobby.
Can't even get to it without that
Woo!
happening. Dude, you don't even
Bobby.
drink, do you?
No, but they send Bloomberg. I review alcohol for Bloomberg, even though I don't drink. So this was from Bob Dylan. They've sent me a lot of high-end whiskeys. Let's see, I reviewed Conor McGregor's whiskey and I compared it to a
Blech.
poorly maintained sauna. So what I've done is I brought alcoholics I know to drink it and you know, like do an informal panel of that. But this was the last bottle I have that I haven't given away is Mr. Bob Dylan's Heaven's Door Tennessee Bourbon. And I'm not even sure, as I say, I don't drink, so red label, whatever the hell that means. But we're just gonna throw it back for the whole hour that we're here.
Here to talk about Bobby Czyz.
Ooh, yeah.
I'm not even I'm not much of a drinker anymore, but I will say a couple years ago I did pick up Proper 12, Conor McGregor's whiskey to try it because that shit was like it was like dirt cheap at the store. They were trying to get rid of it, like doing their dance. That shit was dirt cheap. I picked up a little like fifth of it, a small bottle. Fuck, it was awful. It was not good. Anyway, this is not a
Word.
whiskey review show, but it was not good.
No, I literally did review. It was the first thing they came out at me to Bloomberg and they said, "How would you feel about reviewing Proper 12 and also his UFC fight?" And I said, "I don't watch the UFC. I don't drink. Why would you come to me to review either of these things unless you let me make it fun?" And so I did, and
You're like, I
I
taste like shit and I hate this sport. Print it.
no, I literally did compare. I said it had notes of turpentine and tasted like a poorly maintained Turkish sauna. And that somebody was drinking said, I can't even feel it. It's weaker than Conor McGregor's takedown defense. It was just like the most ridiculously stupid review. And it went everywhere on Twitter. Just being like, because most places will not review anything if they're negative, right? It's just PR. And I was like, "Are you guys okay if we just shit on it?" And they're like, "We don't care." They sent it to us to send to you, so go ahead. So that's yeah, Conor McGregor's whiskey. I mean, I smelled it. It was terrible. Everybody who
It's not good.
liked to drink who was with me hated it.
Oh yeah, there are people that are like, there's notes of vanilla. I was like, there's fucking notes of shit. What are you talking about? It's not good.
Oh, it was awful, awful, awful.
Yeah,
And
and
no,
like I said, I'm not an expert on whiskey, but it didn't taste good to me. But regardless, I mean, it probably tastes good to Bobby Czyz.
well, and we're not here to bury the man. We're here to celebrate him. We're going to look at four of his fights. I mentioned to Patrick for April Fool's Day. Why don't you pick two fights that you feel showcase him at his best? And I will pick two fights that are different, that sort of showcase a kind of eh, his vulnerability, his strength and his vulnerability, which in my case are Corey Sanders and Evander
His
Holyfield.
humanity.
His humanity, yeah. Um, and I understand that people think we're bullying a little bit, but I will remind them that I think both of us have spent hours now watching Bobby Czyz, which is a Sisyphean level of torture. And just before I came on, I listened to an interview where he claimed, says Bobby, that Don Dunphy at the Hall of Fame induction said that Bobby Czyz as a commentator was somebody that he couldn't shine his shoes. The voice of boxing is saying that about Mensa member. Oh yeah, I forgot I was gonna. A lot of props today. When we get to Holyfield, I'm ready.
Oh, so you could just buy a towel. Oh, I didn't realize you.
I
I
bought this from
didn't
Bobby's
realize you the.
website. From Bobby's website. I'm not actually a member of Mensa. My dad applied, actually, I think about 50 years ago. He didn't actually have the money to pay the fee to be in Mensa, which was kind of an interesting indignity. But imagine trying to sign up for Mensa. Like my dad did it as a joke because he thought it was so embarrassing. And they're like, you actually qualified, but it's like a whatever it was, a $15 membership. And he said, well, I don't have $15 because I'm in school and I have to pay my tuition. But Bobby, I mean, I've never heard the origin story of Mensa, why he wanted to join or why it's like the most important detail about him he wants you to know. Along with Patrick, I've done my research here. He finished sixth in a class of 355 classmates. Why would that be a detail that needs to be reported?
I mean, I'd probably just say like, if I were first, I would. But I mean, yeah.
Sixth. Who was it who finished sixth place in the 100-meter dash at the last Olympics? Can you? Because I don't remember.
Who played sixth base on the 1984 fucking Pirates? I don't know. It's who. That's some fucking weird shit to remember.
It's so weird.
I mean, whatever. I guess you got to be proud of your accomplishments or whatever. But no, excuse me. Going back to what you were saying, we honestly are not here to just crap on the guy the entire time, and we did. We're actually going through his career. We're looking, kind of assessing his career, looking at his history. Watched like a significant amount of time of him fighting, and so I mean, it's somewhere, and we didn't do it in a way that we were just like, all right, now look how shitty this guy is. We're actually just watching it as if it's just boxing. I think that is in and of itself, like, that's Jesus Christ, Bryn, you're hitting it. All right. Let's go. Fucking
Woo!
woo. Anyway, not I mean, we're here to fucking, actually talk about him respectfully as a fighter with some jokes thrown in, for sure. But I think that once we kind of do the talking about the outside shit, it's almost kind of like, all right, it's a little bit justified, and that's why we do it. And that's also a reflection of boxing itself, our interest in it, your interest in it, the fans' interest in it and whatnot, that we are, I think that you and I, to be fair, you and I do consistently kind of hold a mirror to ourselves and to fans and stuff like that and mock ourselves and our own interest in this fucking circus and how ridiculous all of this shit often is, including the guy that we're talking about today and much of his career and the shit that he has said and done. And that is kind of the entire point, is not to be jerks, but just to be like, hey, this is some wild shit. What the fuck?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bobby Czyz to us is what Kazakhstan is to Borat. It's just a vehicle to just channel some silliness and ridiculousness. Why? If you wear a towel that says Mensa when you're going out to fight Evander Holyfield, I'm sorry, but 4 DUIs is the reason we've chosen 4 fights. He had 4 DUIs from, I think, 1997 to 2003, which I want to give him full credit for. New Jersey put a new law on the books on the basis that it took 4 DUIs to remove his driver's license. 4. Because they never looked into his driver's license. So they passed, municipal prosecutors now get to obtain the complete driving record of anyone charged with a DUI because of the matinee idol himself, Chappie. So how many places have you heard give him credit for that? I don't think anybody.
4 DUIs, 4 fights, 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, 4 leaf clover. I don't know.
Dressing in army fatigues and trashing the home of your then fiance's mother.
Who among us has not dressed up in military fatigues and trashed some shit at an in-law's house, right?
I mean, I have the Ches t-shirt, but I didn't go as far as the camo shorts or whatever. I should have. But no, I mean, he this is somebody who learned to fight when he was 4 years old. I mean, we can go through a bit of the biography here. He fought for 18 years, fought 60 fights, 28 knockouts, two division champion. One of the weird features of Bobby Czyz, this is why I love Bobby Czyz, because he's so weird. At 18 years old or 19 years old, he fought Reggie Jones and stopped him in Ice World, Totowa, New Jersey, and he won something called the New Jersey middleweight title. Again, it's sort of like the coming in sixth out of your class of 335. Does New Jersey need to have its own middleweight title? Like, should there be a county that gives him the title? It's just a little weird. So I mean, Bobby Czyz is born in February 10, 1962. He's a retired boxer and commentator. A lot of people like his commentary. I absolutely hate it. But I'm not saying he's the worst. I just don't like his personality. Now, as soon as you criticize his personality, you have to caveat this guy had an unbelievably horrible childhood. His dad was enormously abusive and would go on. Bobby at some point told his father, and I'm not joking at this point, Bobby at some point said, "You're dead to me," to his father, who was also his trainer, and his dad committed suicide. And I think that was 1983. And the year after that is when he got arrested for attempted sexual assault, and then the breaking in to the fiance's mother's house and trashing everything. I think there was an attempted assault there. Like, Bobby outside the ring has had real struggles with alcohol and violence and just keeping his life together. Very, very damaged person that you can kind of see why he sort of leads with this Mensa thing, which just, he doesn't want to be judged as kind of in the way that Raging Bull, Jake LaMotta, is sort of, I'm not an animal, I'm not an animal. I get that vibe from Bobby, that it's like a little weird to say you're a member of Mensa and not that you've done anything with that Mensa IQ that is discernible after 62 years of being alive. Like that just has a weird vibe to it for me. But I do want to get across that this guy came from a very troubled background that was not his doing, but it certainly manifested itself over the years in just weird ways. He is a kooky guy, apart from the super disturbing violent stuff and all those DUIs that could have gone way worse for him.
I think that if you're looking at it from kind of like a psychiatric or psychological perspective or whatever, and I'm not saying that he's lying or exaggerating about his childhood. I'm simply saying that even if they weren't true, or even if if he were exaggerating, that would still take a fairly damaged individual to make that up or exaggerate that. You know what I'm saying? Like, even if it didn't happen, something else probably did that would make you fucking make that up and tell that story if it weren't true. So regardless, we're talking about some kooky shit here. And so, I think that is not only fair, but like that's the responsible thing to do, is to acknowledge that he has been pretty consistent about that since pretty early in his career, that his upbringing is really what has made him and turned him into a fighter in terms of his mentality and also being literally a fighter. Um, and he was part of this group called Tomorrow's Champions in the 1980s, that was Alex Balmer Ramos, who now is a fairly prominent member of a few different kind of like post-retirement organizations for fighters, and kind of a high-profile member, Johnny Bumpus, and Tony Ayala Jr., who
Hmm.
is his own show That would be a really, really dark show. Not good. That's one of the few fighters that would go much, much darker than anything Ches has ever done. But I mean, post fighting, that group has not fared super well, needless to say. Um, but actually, Bobby Czyz, in that regard, my point is that he was thought of very highly early in his career as a prospect. And he, among this group, Tony Ayala, very talented fighter, hit hard, very skilled, etc. You know, these guys were thought of very highly. Bobby Czyz was too. And so that a couple of the fights that we were talking about are fairly early in his career. And so, I mean, we're spanning a pretty good amount of time. I will say, though, later on, the fights, like for instance, the Holyfield fight, I mean, maybe it was just my memory. Maybe I just haven't seen it in a long time, but he actually did much better in that fight than I kind of remembered, if I'm being totally honest. But anyway, we'll get to
Well,
that in a little bit.
and the other thing with it that I think it was a really interesting angle is that fight with Holyfield totally transformed the heavyweight division because Tyson and his people watched that fight very closely, and that's exactly why they chose Holyfield because they thought he looked so terrible in that fight. If that's what he looks like against a Bobby Czyz, who had very little punching power as a heavyweight, and Holyfield just couldn't do anything against
He
them. Like
didn't look super great.
he
I
looked
mean,
terrible. He looked, I mean, I think he
yeah,
looked worse than he did against Burt Cooper. There are times where Holyfield just fought to the level of competition in weird ways where it was easy to just think, oh my God, like, there was a lot of talk with him, even in his mid-30s, of this should be the end. Well, Holyfield, like we're getting scared for him, not just the heart stuff, but the James Toney fight looked terrible, terrible, just totally outclassed in
yeah.
that. With Bobby, it was really
And
freakish, and there's a weird
Tony
thing
was
with his
also
eyes.
he was coming off the roids, and then Tony was probably pumped full of them himself. So it's like
True.
a weird crossroads of fucking roid history in boxing there.
Yeah,
But
and Holyfield's pointed that out, saying that like he doesn't really consider that a loss because Tony was using roids, and Holyfield, to my knowledge, has always denied ever using any drugs of any kind, which is one of the most laughable. I mean, he is the poster boy of PEDs, I think, in boxing.
what poster boy for, sorry for listeners who get their fucking, feelies hurt here, but poster boy for fake Christianity too, because his entire career preached a bunch of that bullshit, and then it turned out he was, having tons of kids out of wedlock to the point where he, lost half of his shit to the IRS. I mean, I'm not here to slam Holyfield either, but point is, yeah, he did not look super great in that fight. So that's a big part of what we'll talk about here too.
And the other thing to remember is during that fight with Ches, the announcers point out that up to that point, how crazy is this? Holyfield had the largest career earnings in the history of boxing. That's where Holyfield was at that time, and sort of why Tyson targeted him because of how awful he looked. So it's just that Ches it's this weird intersectionality with Holyfield is really interesting. I mean, the other thing about Ches, which I don't know how much it marked him, it was a kind of detail that was brought up a fair bit, but he was a member of the amateur boxing team of Americans that died on a Polish Airlines flight 007 when it crashed in 1980. And the only reason he wasn't on that trip is he was recovering from a car accident, non-alcohol related. I'll say. I mean, maybe it was alcohol, but it wasn't him drinking that I'm aware of. But so that shaped him a great deal. Is that he sort of, as some of these people that have the near-death thing, destiny is leading them to whatever. He pointed it out a lot. Like it clearly spooked him in a way that also seemed to have inspired him. The other thing I'll say is that as much as I'm mocking him about the Menza thing, and I'm not mocking him that I'm saying he's stupid, but just mocking leading with that, sort of like Sharon Stone forever saying she had 154 IQ and was a member of Menza. It turned out she was never a member of Menza. She's never recorded an IQ that's up there. Chez's brother, Vincent Czyz, is a Columbia educated writer and professor. And interestingly, talk about intersectionality. In 2016, he won something called the Eric Hoffer Award. Do you know who won the Eric Hoffer Award in 2009? Not a joke. You could look it up. So I feel a connection to the Czyz family on that basis.
Yeah, and when you win the Eric Hoffer Award, they send you the bottle of champagne. So like it's like you've gotten drunk with Bobby Czyz,
They,
basically.
they send you some bourbon, some nice Bob Dylan bourbon.
Getting drunk with Bobby Czyz, basically. Oh my
Woo!
God. Right from the bottle. Graduating.
That was for the Eric Hoffer Award, which I think you have to like. I had an agent pay $50 for them to read. Like it's the most stupid award ever. It's like sort of almost like a pay to play literary award. So yeah, me and Vincent.
Well, I
Um,
guess paying the right thing, but that's I mean, and that's it's kind of a double-edged sword in a way. You know what I mean? Like the whole IQ thing too. And I'm not going to try to go out into onto like a whole new branch of this conversation here, but I think that it's been in recent years demonstrated that the entire idea of testing IQ is, it's fairly racist, classist, etc. And there are a lot of different ways in which it's not a very good measurement of actual intelligence, but nonetheless, it's something that a lot of people still cling to and a lot of people still kind of, see as an accurate measurement in that regard. So, I mean, I get it. Like, I get that why you would want people to think that you're an intelligent individual and not some brute, especially because Bobby Czyz kind of does look like a brute. And that's something with, like, look, dude, fucking, I'm a caveman looking motherfucker. You know what I mean? I get it. Like, in pretty much my entire
that's all it is. You're
teenage
right.
years onward, people see me and they're just like, who's this fucking caveman looking guy? And then when I speak, okay, they're like, oh, he's actually kind of smart. And so I understand kind of like trying to break that perception or whatever. I get it. But nonetheless, you it's like wearing a t-shirt that's like, I'm me smart. I'm smart, like what?
It's embarrassing. It's really embarrassing. But I get it. And the guy, JD Salinger, for example, had a 104 IQ. That's what it was measured at. One of the great literary giants of the 20th century had 104 IQ. So does the IQ speak for him, or that he's one of the most revered authors of the 20th century? Whereas Bobby Czyz, what are his great intellectual achievements on the basis of having the top, 98th percentile IQ that he announced for Showtime? Good for you. But that's about it. And coming in sixth in his New Jersey
Altering
class.
city ordinances.
Yeah, and altering city ordinances. Uh, Phil, bridging bridging over legal oversights in recognizing prospective DUI probability, so he's
When
just a
you're over Passaic, dude, you see the Bobby Czyz freeway, but then down the little writing it says bought by Bobby Czyz.
Jesus. Yeah, I mean they should have like the sobriety test, should they name it after him. But anyway, we're getting into nasty bullying territory. I do think it's interesting. One feature of him that intrigues me as I watch him is this is a guy who started fighting. I think he was 18 when he began. He is 161 pounds at the beginning of his career. He's going to end his career fighting at 220 against Corey Sanders. This mammoth, Ernest Hemingway looking guy with a huge mustache from South Africa. And Bobby's plan there was I don't think he has heart and I don't think he has toughness, which is an interesting thing to say about a guy who in the future is going to die shielding his daughter from people that came in to rob a birthday party or something. I think it was an armed robbery, and he shielded his daughter and took bullets. So Bobby, the Mensa IQ let him down a little bit in assessing where Corey Sanders was coming from in that battle, and he takes a savage beating in that. But anyway, he begins his career in 1980. He's 161 and a half pounds. And I also just like part of the weirdness here is a guy referring to himself as the matinee idol. And I mean, even this picture is like, I don't look at this and go, yeah, Marlon Brando. Yeah, James Dean. Oh, was he a model before he got into boxing? It's just a weird with this big coiffed hair. He kind of looks like the guy from The Sopranos who would suntan himself outside of the that little Italian restaurant.
And I don't think
Ollie.
that's even that far off because it really does seem like the look too is kind of like a holdover from the ideals of like the 50s. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Where like you'd see like a handsome guy and it was always a dude with like a butt chin or like a cleft chin. And he was, I mean, I'm not, I don't have a problem with butt chins. I'm just saying,
Oh
but that
no.
was like, there would be like, like a strong jaw and shit. And so you look at Bobby Czyz and he's got a pretty strong cleft chin and like
Oh,
he's doing his hair all pumped up and shit like that. And it does seem kind of like that's what he was going for. That almost kind of like that barbershop type of, that type of look or whatever. And well, I don't know, whatever. Maybe others were into it. God damn. All right then.
it's actually iced tea, but
I knew there was something. Knew there was something.
yeah, I was actually exercising before this, so I just was really thirsty before we started.
Yeah, I knew there was some catch, dude. YouTube's gonna send me a thing, no drinking on the thing. We're gonna be like, you
Yeah,
gotta watch the episode, bro.
I have about a pina colada every 2 years. That's about the first.
I was gonna say, there's no way he's hitting the fucking bottle like this.
I wish it was like my leaving Las Vegas kind of moment, but yeah, I mean, Bobby, the other thing about Bobby is he's got these little 68-inch arms. I mean, when you look at Rocky Marciano when he's fighting people, Marciano I think was 69 inches, maybe, really short arms, but it looks even more pronounced on Bobby. I think he lies by saying he's 5'10" and a half. He looks a little shorter to me. Tyson always said he was a quarter inch under 6 feet. Bullshit. He's probably 5'10" and a half. He's slightly taller than me. I've stood next to him a few times. I'm right at 5'10". Tyson's definitely a little bit taller than me. Bobby looks really small when he's next to Holyfield. Really small. And his arms are so short that he consistently leans over to try to make up for the reach. So it's one reason why he has so little power at times. Not all the time. He really is a skilled counterpuncher. I think he's got some very sound skills actually as a fighter. I just think he has anatomically a lot of limitations that, I mean, sometimes he overcomes them by how tough he is, as we're going to see with some of the fights, the two fights that you chose. He does. We're going to get to a fight where he defeats an Olympic champion who Sugar Ray Leonard is like in the front row and was championing and stuff like that. But overall, the physical deficits he has with his reach and even like the way his body is set up, like he's just not a very powerful puncher, particularly, and not the most athletic. Uh, but very tough. It highlights the good qualities that he has as a fighter. He's tough. He's an intelligent counterpuncher. If you hurt him, he gets more aggressive. Like he never gives up. He was stopped 5 times, but he never gives up. He fights harder the more adversity that he confronts. So I do have some positive things to say about him. And I will also say I think he's a pretty exciting fighter to the best of his ability. He wants to have brawls, which is a terrible idea in terms of the amount of punishment he takes often. But it's certainly like the crowd is loud for him. It's impressive. I think I'm curious what you would think. I mean, he loses, I think, in his 14th fight or something, somewhere around there. 12,
Yeah,
13 fight.
and to Mustafa Hamsho. So not, not the kind of loss that you would, be super concerned for a fighter about. Mustafa Hamsho is a very good fighter and a very, tough fighter and whatever. So you wouldn't, if your fighter lost to Mustafa Hamsho early in his career, you probably wouldn't be like, oh man, you got to throw it away, quit now. It's a tough fight. But no, yeah, he lost fairly early in his career, so that kind of got knocked off.
Yeah, and I mean, they always bring this up, the announcers, and I mean, I was just a little kid as this stuff was happening. I was a baby as this was happening, but they're sort of presenting him as the matinee idol, hometown favorite. Oh, the New Jersey crowds when he's fighting at the boardwalk, and you see him at the Trump Plaza fighting and stuff like that, as if he was going to become this immensely marketable fighter. And yet, at the end of his career, he frequently made the point that like he wanted to fight Mike Tyson. He wanted to get a seven-figure payday because he never really had a big payday in his career. So I'm wondering if it's just sort of Bobby Czyz lacking self-awareness about his commercial potential, or was he marketable? Like, was he a kind of like shitty version of Oscar De La Hoya? And I don't mean that to discredit Bobby. I just mean De La Hoya was so marketable. You know, as we discussed in terms of him and Floyd Mayweather, like he was Paris Hilton and Floyd became the Kim Kardashian that took over. But Bobby was not that. Like Bobby was not a pay-per-view fighter. I don't think Bobby ever had a pay-per-view fight whatsoever. So I thought that was just curious that they always bring it up, the announcers, about just how much fans love him. And I was like, are they trying to sell you on that, or was that actually true? What's your sense?
I think it was more of a hard sell, dude. I mean, I honestly like he just didn't he did not have the charisma. And that's not even to say that even like an Oscar De La Hoya, not a super charismatic guy. Like, you get
No.
it, you get him in like a live interview setting where you're
Oh,
like
the
giving him
worst.
questions. He's awkward, dude. Ray Leonard was too, to be honest. But Ray Leonard practiced his canned responses like, so he could deliver some canned responses and similar to Oscar De La Hoya had a built-in story that was fantastic. And so Bobby Ches didn't have the built-in story the same way, and he did not have the kind of charisma or charismatic personality to bridge that gap. That was part of the issue, at least in my opinion. Um, you know, they put, and it wasn't like for lack of exposure. He was on television regularly, and he did fight in New Jersey very regularly. Fought in Atlantic City all the time. Back when in the early and mid '80s, when Trump was kind of really getting in on hosting fights there, but like regular fights there, not just big fights.
Yeah.
And like the big fights happened like late '80s, early '90s. But that being said, yeah, I think a lot of it was his personality, dude. And so, you can repeat that you're a matinee idol and that you're a massive star. You can have the announcers and commentators say it till they're blue in the fucking face, but that doesn't necessarily make it true. The proof's in the pudding or in the ticket sales and in the fan response and stuff like that. And I think that on the level of like boxing fans being loyal to like boxing people and just knowing boxing names overall, they probably like Bobby Ches, but generally speaking, is not like a heroic figure in boxing, never really was, none of that kind of thing.
No, it reminded me a bit like when we've talked about Andre Ward. There's a similar kind of defensiveness that leads with arrogance
You
about
can call
the
it
fight.
delusion. I mean,
Yeah, it does feel a bit like delusion, but it's a little bit angry because there's a quality with
defiant or
Ward.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a certain defiance where, at least in Ward's case, it's like you're undefeated, you're a Hall of Fame fighter, world champion, huge respect all over the place for how good you were, how disciplined you were, etc. But fundamentally, just nobody really cared as far as paying for it. Like and like that's not the end of the world, but don't pretend that's like it's martyrdom, that somehow you could have done this and this and this to be endlessly marketable, but you chose not to. Yeah, okay, maybe, but you
Well, then
couldn't.
then you live with that choice, which is what normal people do.
Well, and proof is that when you do tell your story in your recently published book, what kind of commercial excitement was generated from it? Nothing. Like really nothing. It just came and went. It's in the religious section at Barnes and Noble. It's not even in like the memoir section or the sports section. It's all self-aggrandizement, sort of like calling yourself matinee idol or the Mensa thing. And it's like, okay, like at least with Ward, we know it's totally true in the sense of it's a brilliant career.
Yeah, he didn't lose. I mean,
No, and
but
he made a lot of money relative to somebody that was not a pay-per-view fighter or ever had much commercial appeal, despite being an Olympic champion and a world champion and a good-looking guy and well-spoken and now a respected announcer, but nobody was really thrilled about him. They just weren't in a widespread kind of way. And I feel like even if you brought that up, like if you said to him, is there ever been a boxer who made more money while making people who invested in you lose more money? I think he would deny the premise of the question, even though it's objectively true. Which is sort of the Bobby thing. Like even every time I encounter Bobby talking about himself as an announcer, he's not just a good announcer. Don Dunphy has said he's the greatest announcer ever. And you're like, all right, thanks, Bobby. Glad we talked
Yeah,
about it.
this is one area where you could have gone the top six. Okay, this is one area where you could have been like, I'm sixth. This is
Yeah.
yeah. Don't overshoot it if you're going to go for a lie. Don't overshoot it, Bobby. But but I think that you have a good point in that it's a similar level of delusion. Whatever you want to call it, basically where it's similar. Andre Ward, virtually every single one of his professional fights was at least televised, if not featured. Obviously, he was fighting on undercards earlier in his career, but he was always a gold medalist or, America's only gold medalist in recent Olympic. That was often how he was kind of
Yeah.
marketed. So
Still is the last one in the last 20 years.
for the
Male.
men,
Male. Yeah, that's
yeah,
what I
for the
said.
men.
Male.
But regardless, yeah, that's been part of his story. He's gotten a very good marketing push. And so then to turn around and say like, like I was shortchanged my entire career is kind of like, bro, no, you're fucking doing a disservice to the fighters and the people in life in other, facets of life who actually are getting shortchanged. What the fuck? You're not getting shortchanged at all. You know,
That's
you, people just didn't care. And that's not, I don't know what you want is, it's kind of like that tabloid situation where people are like, oh, these tabloids are awful. Why do they sell these grocery market rags? People read them and buy them. And if they didn't, that it, all of these things that dictate, does popular good? No, not necessarily. And just like with Andre Ward, he was extremely good, if not the best of his time, or in the short period of time, I should say. But regardless, who cares? Nobody really cared. And so, similarly, circling it back to Bobby Czyz, he's on TV a lot. He was featured a lot. And the
yeah.
people already kind of spoke their mind and that, like, okay, we're interested, but we're not like invested like that. We're not following this guy like that. So, pretend that was the case is yeah not true. And so let's see, he's turned pro in 1980. It took him 6 years to get a title shot. That loss against Hamsho, like I said, not the kind of loss that destroys a career you should be ashamed of. However, it did kind of throw him off track from getting a title shot, whereas a lot of those other fighters, the Bumpus, Alex Ramos, etc., those guys were a little bit more on track for title shots. That Hamsho fight knocked him off a little bit. However, when he circled back around, the gold medalist that you brought up, Slobodan Kačar, a guy from Yugoslavia who won the gold medal in 1980, definitely eh, not a great fight by any means. And I think that if nothing else, this is a fight that demonstrates, they even mentioned it on the broadcast, and I thought it was a pretty astute point that demonstrates, especially during this time, the extremely upright and like stiff, uh, the style that they considered and called a European style, even at the time. And we can still kind of see that in a way, although things have changed in recent years. But Slobodan Kačar fought in that really kind of stuck in the mud type of style where he's like not really moving his head much, but just kind of there to be hit. And that really helped facilitate Bobby Czyz's short arms finding the target in that night. But even so, something that you brought up earlier, you do also in this fight get to see a little bit of a showcase of some of the good things about Bobby Czyz too, overcoming that height disadvantage and fighting a guy who is admittedly very well schooled, but just did not have enough punching power to really keep Bobby Czyz off that night.
Yeah, and let's remember. So I checked. Czyz went undefeated for 20 fights into that until that loss, and he was gunning for Hagler. I mean, there was a decent chance that he would have got a Hagler fight, which I think would have gone worse than Marvis Frazier getting Larry Holmes in terms of what Hagler would have done to Bobby. Like, I think Bobby, especially with his chin, his determination, would have taken a hellacious beating at the hands of Hagler. Like, he's nowhere near that class. So probably the best thing that ever happened to him was losing to not have that chance.
We saw Hagler beat the absolute shit out of a whole bunch of shorter or smaller middleweights pretty much his entire career. I have little doubt it would have gone any differently.
Well, no, and I think Marvin Hagler also, like, his reach was insane, wasn't it? Like 75-inch reach. So like, I mean, and Bobby's body was weird. He struggled with weight a lot. Like, it was a real issue for him why he had to keep moving up. But like, his body is in his legs. He's not like Mike Tyson thick or David Tua thick legs, but they're just sort of amorphously thick. Like, he never really had much of an upper body.
Yeah, he's like a plumber or something.
Yeah,
Like a laborer that's just fucking big.
he is. You would never look at him and just be like, that clearly is a professional athlete. He doesn't just genetically have that kind of look. But it is interesting, as you say, when he's facing, especially when we're going to get to the Maynard fight, there you're fighting like a great athlete, an Olympic champion as well. And Bobby just overcomes it with his tenacity. And I mean, I'm amazed when you talk about Kochar being a gold medalist from 1980. He looks fucking terrible. I mean, he is a very, very limited fighter. I mean, it reminded me of like Don Flamenco from Mike Tyson's Punch Out. They look similar. They fight similar. Like, he sort of fights like a Nintendo algorithm of like four different things they just does over and over and over and over again. And Bobby, in his sort of little Mac way, just sort of refuses to let him sort of lay back and operate. And just that pressure, Kachar just has no answer almost the entire fight. It's embarrassing, but you're not like, clearly Bobby needs to fight Marvin Hagler. It's just, my God, how did this guy win an Olympic gold medal? And how is he a champion? Like, who is this guy? Where did he come from? And what is the division at this time?
I think that it became clear, like in the early 1980s, that he was struggling with these kind of second tier type of fighters at middleweight, where if you're struggling against the second tier, the Elijah Obeds, the Robbie Sims, Mustafa Hamsho, those guys who are like ranked maybe just outside the top 10 or top 15. And if you're not going through those guys, you're not putting those guys away or getting really convincing wins over them, it's really tough to argue that you deserve a shot at Hagler. And then like you said, the loss with Hamsho and then struggles with weight had him moving up in weight. And at that point in the early 1980s, there wasn't going to be anything done at 168 pounds because it just wasn't really a thing. So he goes up to light heavyweight. And yeah, dude, like I said earlier too, the Kachar fight really demonstrating, I wouldn't say peculiar, but fairly typical quote unquote European style where and also you also have to take into account Qatar won a gold medal at the 1980 Olympics. 1980 Olympics was the one that we boycotted, and I'm not saying that, oh, well, if the US wasn't taking place, then that shit doesn't count. But you do kind of have to look at it with a discerning eye a little bit because number one, we can see with our own eyes that he's like kind of a not ultra skilled fighter, generally speaking. And number two, it is fair to say that a very major player who had a lot of very highly ranked amateurs, the US that is, not competing in the 1980 Olympics was damaging. And then on top of that, you brought up the Polish the air crash, which is all but forgotten about. There were some incredible fighters who died on that plane. Almost the entire U.S. boxing team died on that plane, which is like a horrific incident. You should go read about it if you're into that type of thing. But nonetheless, those things really affected the outcome of the 1980 Olympics. It just did. So in any case, kind of have to look at it in that regard too. And then ultimately Bobby Czyz. So anyway, I don't know that we necessarily need to go through it round by round per se, because it's really Kachar struggling to keep Bobby Czyz off of him with like a really weak jab, like a man, I don't know who his trainer was, and I didn't look it up. But if I were in Kachar's corner, I'd been like, "What the fuck are you doing with your jab, dude?" Because it's the weakest jab I've ever seen in my life. It wouldn't do anything to anybody. He's bringing it back low, keeping his hand, he's like not doing shit and just getting countered to hell by little arm Bobby Czyz.
Yeah, no, Bobby with his little T-Rex, you know.
Pow, 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 pow.
Well, and so I mean, it's also just weird because I mean, here it's 1986. We're at the Las Vegas Hilton. They misspell it on the broadcast. Like going back to some of these fights, it's hilarious. It's the Las Vegas Hilton. Like the graphic is wrong. Bobby comes out with more stars and stripes than a GOP convention. He's just draped in the flag everywhere in a way that it's so pandering. Like I don't know. Like I just
It's that
there's
80s USA jingoism. USA. It's like
yeah.
people just break out in that shit on like TV shows and movies during that time. My God, it's so fucking embarrassing.
I know, and it's like with Stallone, you don't mind because it's Stallone, but with Bobby, you're like, there can only be one Stallone. You know, like one guy gets to be the person lacking the self-awareness who cynically is trying to exploit this, that I am the American underdog sort of thing, and he's now in the fucking Hall of Fame. Like the man is in the fucking Hall of Fame without having thrown a punch. Unlike Bobby, he has 60 fights and is nowhere near the Hall of Fame. That is interesting. But yeah, so
People
Bobby,
directing their ire toward Jackie Tonawanda, but then don't care about fucking Stallone. Anyway,
yeah,
that's a Tone
yeah.
show.
Well, and so Bobby in this fight, I mean, I don't know who the main event was on this date. I couldn't find it, but he has this raccoon pelt on his head of hair, and most of the seats in the arena are empty. Like he's fighting Kochar in front of basically nobody, and the announcers are terrible. Like it's a really weird event. And the other thing is like Bobby is doing a basic thing. I remember when I started fighting and I would lean because I also don't have super long arms. That is like week one with the trainer after sparring is like stop leaning, reach, but don't lean because you'll have no leverage. There's no way to get torque on your punches. So Bobby in this is, as you're saying, countering really effectively against one of the more embarrassing champions I've ever seen, probably one of the worst Olympic champions I've ever watched in Kochar. Like, how did that guy get anywhere in boxing? It's staggering. I mean, like he makes Jake Paul look like Jack Dempsey. Like he's amazingly ineffectual, and Czyz is leaning in all the time. He's landing flurries a lot, but even landing probably half his shots, he's just not able to do much damage because there's not enough on it. He can't get his legs behind the punch because he's leaning so far forward. It's really strange. And if you're fighting a guy like this, I mean, Lennox Lewis has shown us anybody who's short who leans in, just club him down with the elbow, like go porn. So it's really weird to see Bobby in this position, but Bobby is busy the entire fight. Um, it's as I say, I don't particularly like Bobby as a fighter. I don't think he would have ever been elite. Beyond being a champion, like he good for him. But Hagler, I think, would have knocked him out in a round, maybe 2 rounds at best for Bobby, which is just because he has this chin. But Bobby, what I will give him is he's tenacious and he's highly motivated. He's somebody that he will not quit. And that's abundantly evident in this fight. Is he really is going for the brass ring to try to win this championship. And I think he looks good in the whole fight. Like, in terms of what he's able to do with his limitations, he generates excitement. Like he unlike like even a Mayweather who gets booed all the time in his fights. When we go back and watch those fights, Bobby's kind of the opposite. You're kind of surprised at how many cheers he gets from the crowd. It's like a big feature of the way he fights, which I do want to give him his due, because people forget that with Mayweather, they just look at the victory. He's undefeated and he beat everybody. But throughout those fights, he was not taking risks. Not that he has to, but Bobby took a lot of risks, and it definitely got a lot of applause and cheers, and periodically people coming to their feet. And I'm not surprised, but it's more because he looks like a little Mac kind of character. Then you're like, oh my God, like how is he doing what he's doing? It's sort of like this is what I would look like with no training getting in there. Like he doesn't have any superpowers. He just has a lot of willpower.
Right, yeah, in terms of, like, physical attributes or physical talents, whatever you wanna call them, he's not great in any one particular area, and so that makes it pretty tough to overcome, that you do where you don't have like, you're not 9 or 10 in any particular area. It's pretty tough to get to the top that way, and he got pretty damn close, so you do have to give him that. Two things I was gonna say that the headliner of that card was Michael Spinks versus Stefan Tankstad. And then I think the co-feature was Mike Tyson versus Alfonso Ratliff. And also fighting on that card was Buster Douglas too, a little bit farther down on the card. It was a Don King Butch Lewis card, and Butch Lewis was the one who was involved with Michael Spinks for a long ass time.
Great
And
character.
definitely,
Amazing.
yeah, definitely a character for sure. Kind of shady, like many of the people in boxing, but a
But funny.
character, definitely a character for sure. But the second thing was that I think that Kachar's ability, or the fact that he won a title at light heavyweight, has a lot to do with the fact that Michael Spinks had moved up to heavyweight. And had he not, I don't know that we would see Kachar winning a title at light heavyweight. And that kind of vacuum of power or whatever really did allow him to do that. But the fact that Bobby Czyz also, who himself, like we've said, is not the most elite of fighters, was able to handle Kachar the way that he did. Kachar was undefeated at that time, by the way. Um,
Crazy.
yeah, but the fact that he was able to handle him the way that he did also speaks to the fact that the division itself was not super strong at that point.
But we do need to say blows my mind. He won his title against Eddie Mustafa Muhammad in
Yeah,
like the previous fight. That's where he won it in a split decision, like a 15-round split decision, which by the way, Harold Letterman was one of the judges in that fight. But he's only going to have two more fights after Ches. He wins his next one on points, then he gets knocked out by some Italian Blaine Logsdon. But that's it. Like, I mean, he's out. Like he pretty brief career, and we have to give Ches some credit for derailing an Olympic champion who is a world champion who beat a credible champion to get a title, and off he goes into the sunset of Serbia.
okay, Jim, you got to give points to Bobby Czyz for doing your Vice Association of Boxing Commissioners. Jim,
Okay, Jim. I can't do it. Yours is much better than mine.
I never met him. Or, I mean, just kind of in passing, but from everything I've heard, he was a great guy and a super super nice dude. Um, now dude, the entire thing here, man. Like even with uh shit, the dude fuck. Now I got to go back and look because I got tangled in my brain here. But the
Eddie
dude that
Mustafa Muhammad.
Eddie Mustafa Muhammad. God, dude, there's a few too many names in that era that are a little bit too similar, and sometimes I get my
Sure.
wires crossed with them. Yes, Eddie Mustafa Muhammad also was definitely toward the end of his career there, and had already gone through like the remnants. That was kind of the remnants of the division that Michael Spinks had gone through, and that's what I mean is that there was a little bit of a balance or a vacuum of power in his, in the wake of him leaving up to heavyweight. And also on top of that, dude, in the late 70s and early 1980s at light heavyweight, all of those guys beat the absolute shit out of each other. So like
Yeah.
they fucked each other up. So by the mid 80s, it was, there was basically a wasteland in that regard compared to what it was, slightly before that. But again, what Kachar looked like against Ches, I think, is proof positive of what we're talking about. It wasn't a strong division.
Oh, he's awful.
And
I mean,
yeah,
he
dude,
was awful, awful. And it's not like he had an off night.
zero inside fighting, like zero, like doesn't know how to do it at all. And on top of not knowing how to fight inside, doesn't clinch well either. Ches gets close, and he's really clumsily trying to clinch him and can't really do it. And so on top of that, gets hit with these inside right hands that are just like bap bap bap. It doesn't look good, and it does make you wonder how the fuck was he undefeated? How did he supposedly go 241-9 as an amateur? That also speaks to the fact that that system that he went through probably wasn't either very good or was favoring some shit in the amateurs that was not or not very good in terms of carrying it over to the pros. But fuck, how was he undefeated? How?
No, and he had Dundee in his corner too. I mean, the last thing I'll say on this fight that I had written down in my notes was the fight ends when Bobby basically lands 25 punches in a row on Kuchar. I mean, his mouth guard just goes soaring out at one point. But you're just sort of like, wow, look, how did this guy get in a position to win a world title or an Olympic gold medal? Like, okay, the US isn't in there, but this guy,
Yeah.
it's amazing. And when the ref stops the fight, totally incredulously, Dundee jumps in like it's the most grave
Yeah.
injustice in the history of the
Yeah,
sport. And
Kachar's kind of like, what? What's happening?
yeah,
I'm like, what? Bro,
it,
you're
it
getting dinged around like a motherfucker.
yeah, it's really, really bizarre. And Ches is only 24 at this point. Like I found myself sort of wondering, where does he think he's going now? Like, it's not easy to come back from losing a fight when you're sort of on this ride to like maybe he was delusional enough to think that he would be competitive against Hagler. I mean, I don't, but I would put nothing past Bobby in the realm of delusion and and overestimation of his potential. Because I think he made arguments that, like before the Holyfield fight, that he could give Tyson a fight. He could figure Tyson out. I think Tyson would have knocked him out in 20 seconds.
Yeah, well, and it's not a favorable matchup either style wise because he'd have to be inside on Tyson, who just had far far more punching power, and built a different way, even though he had somewhat similar dimensions, built a different way, far better hand speed, and
And
that
foot
was
speed, like Bobby has no foot speed. Bobby
no.
creates no angles. It's rock'em sock'em whenever he's fighting of just do 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 do.
There are a handful of kind of clever maneuvers there in terms of being able to kind of like some of the shit that he did. And don't get me wrong, because Montel Griffin was headed by the great Eddie Futch, and Ches had no Futch in him. Don't get me wrong here, but he did do some clever shit. Kind of reminded me of Montel Griffin because Griffin also had kind of short arms,
You know,
not very small, light heavyweight, and so he would have to figure out a way in too, and not very much punching power. And so a lot of the fights that he won, he was trying to figure out a way in and figure out how to outscore opponents. And it was tough. That's a tough assignment, for Bobby
super tough.
Ches. And so
No, no,
you got to give him credit because there was some kind of clever shit that he was doing in there, even though it was entertaining.
no, and I'm not. I'm just saying that using foot speed to create angles, to find
Hmm.
openings, and exploit somebody being off balance and exposed was not how Bobby
Totally.
operated. He definitely was exceedingly skilled because he didn't have great hand speed by any means, but he was always willing to throw combinations. Like he's not throwing two punches in response to stuff. It's three or four punches all the time. He's willing to take a shot. He is hugely reliant on his chin. His chin is in the air quite a bit too. Like he's got a much bigger head than the rest of his body. So his dimensions are sort of there to be hit in many ways. He also has kind of a broader body. He doesn't have that slim V that a lot of boxers are kind of known for, where it kind of gets tapered. So Bobby's thing is really, as you say, getting in the inside because of his short arms, and then when to punch is for me his superpower
Right.
because his timing to punch off of the other guy punching is exceptional, and it has nothing to do with his athleticism at all. It's just his intelligence and his courage. And it, as we're seeing, like, I mean, we're talking about your two fights is him beating two undefeated Olympic champions. And he makes them look pretty silly. Because I mean, I don't know that I would say Kuchar is better athletically than Bobby, which is saying nothing. but Kochar looks fucking terrible. But Maynard is a totally different animal in terms of he's got some real tools. I don't think he utilizes them very well. I don't know what his game plan is against Bobby, but Bobby is really his general orientation is to brawl. And for a guy with 68-inch arms, as he's getting into bigger and bigger weight classes with guys who can hit, Bobby does not in any way as he goes up in weight speed up. His foot speed gets worse in many respects. He's much more available to be hit. And Bobby takes a lot of punishment in his career. Like that's another thing. If you hear him interviewed now, you can hear the shots he's taken. Like I don't know that he was stopped 5 times. I don't think he was ever knocked out, but he's definitely knocked down a handful of times, and it took a lot to knock him down. So he sustained a lot of punishment, I think, in his career. And from his dad beating him and beating the family, like his dad was extraordinarily abusive to everybody in the family, and all the sparring and everything. Like Bobby's endured a lot of violence in his life.
That shit adds up, dude. A lot of people fail to kind of consider the sparring and the training, and especially when fighters have done it from a very young age. That shit's cumulative, there's no formula, and it's not predictable, unfortunately. But it's cumulative. That all that damage adds up. So and on top of that, it does seem to kind of be overall dictated by style. Yeah, there's some outliers where somebody like Jake LaMotta, who is not known for super great defense, lives to be fairly elderly and has most of his faculties about him pretty much the entire time, but that's an extreme outlier, of course. The vast majority of the time, that is not the case.
Yeah.
So yeah, and with Bobby Czyz, it's a style where he kind of has to take punishment, or at least some degree of it. He's pretty good at taking some of the mustard off of some of the shots, rolling with them, ducking under them, bobbing, weaving, all that kind of stuff, but not everything.
No, and he's unlike Tyson, who's using his defense to convert into offense. Bobby, it's really timing the shots
Hmm.
and taking a lot of punishment. Like Tyson, before losing Kevin Rooney, it was an event when Tyson got hit cleanly, and and that's not the case with Bobby. Bobby takes a fair bit of shots. He's willing to do it. He knows he has to in order to land what he can. And the other problem is he needs to land a lot of shots to stop people. It's cumulative. He's not a one punch knockout guy. Not to say like I think in his career he had a few times where he put somebody away with some big shot, but Bobby is not a puncher by any means. And it means that he just has to continually put on pressure and be willing to throw 3, 4, 5 punches and step into the line of fire to deliver them. And you're going to take shots from people. The more if you punch, you're open. And he's not the most defensively responsible while he's throwing flurries either. So it makes it exciting, but it's exciting because you know he's in trouble. He's willing to accept a very high degree of danger that a lot of other guys would not when he steps up in competition. So it's why you see the crowd reacting the way they do, and it's why when Mayweather gets booed, we know how skilled he is. It just annoys us he doesn't accept more danger. But in the end, Floyd sounds exactly the way he did at the beginning of his career. It's not an accident.
Yep. Yeah, and you brought it up earlier too. This other fight that I chose against Andrew Maynard, this is two undefeated Olympic gold medalists that Bobby Czyz ran into. And I guess I probably chose these wins because I figured they were most likely his best wins in terms of looking back and seeing, the fighters that he defeated and at the time that he defeated them. And I mean, I don't mean to say that after we were just sitting here shitting on Kachar the entire time and saying, oh, that's his best win. But no, in terms of how he looked, in terms of how he performed, and in terms of also what he was able to overcome against Andrew Maynard too. I always knew Andrew Maynard as the guy who defeated the husk of Matthew Saad Muhammad in the early
Yeah.
1990s. I never really knew too much about him other than that, until I started getting more into the history shit. But the guy was an Olympic gold medalist in the 1988 Olympics. the one that Roy Jones was robbed at in Seoul, should have had another gold, but he was also a multiple time US amateur champion, and a very highly touted prospect, a guy who was very skilled. And you could see it in the Bobby Czyz fight too. In a number of rounds, he does very well, and Bobby Czyz does not look good at a few points where you're like, damn, dude, he's kind of getting hasted a little bit here. And he does seem to have to overcome some adversity, Bobby Czyz, that is, against Andrew Maynard, who, again, he's got Bobby Czyz has about twice as much pro experience as Andrew Maynard in this fight, which is, I think, also, again, a good indicator of what they thought of Andrew Maynard going into this fight. Just, practically speaking, these fights are not made all the time to be competitive. They're made to showcase one guy over the other. And I think Andrew Maynard was probably the guy getting showcased here, managed by Sugar Ray Leonard. Definitely a hot fighter coming into this.
Maynard is undefeated. I think he's going to go on to get horrendously knocked out by Tommy Hearns not long after. Brutal. Oh, Hearns, I think, in one round as a light heavyweight. But up to this point, he's undefeated. As you say, he's got Sugar Ray Leonard in there. We're in Atlantic City. So Czyz is an opponent who's selling tickets for Maynard. Like, I think this fight was really set up to put Maynard in a position to have a challenge, but somebody that he should really easily navigate and be able to figure out. So it's interesting to see the trajectory of this, because Maynard looks a lot better than he is. He looks like somebody who's just a really formidable champion. He has this great pedigree. He doesn't fight that way. It's nowhere near as bad as Kuchar, but you're just sort of like, Bobby shouldn't be able to overcome these physical deficits, and he just does, where you're like, oh, this is the theme. This is like Bobby is just better with what he brings to bear here in terms of the way he can figure out a fight and use, I hate to say it, but his intelligence to sort of overcome his physical disadvantages in this fight. His training has been better. He has a strategy in terms of, like we say, like the timing on the inside and his willingness to really throw punches and go out on the attack. It's as if Maynard never conceived that he would be on the defensive against a fighter like Bobby Czyz, and he doesn't know what to do on the defensive.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting fight to watch, because Bobby is getting, bigger here. I mean, what is he, 175, 174 pounds at this point? And he is stalking, even though he's not a puncher. And yeah, I mean, the announcer says at the beginning of the fight, Bobby is trying to, for the last time, trying to salvage a career. That is how he's presented to his audience by the announcer of this fight in the first round. So that's interesting too. And that's another thing to give him credit for, is that people were writing him off already at this point. Like, we're in 1990 at this point. Bobby would be what, 28 years old, but already he was an opponent more than anything to somebody like Maynard. And he has the tenacity. I mean, there's a lot of other fight. Mike Tyson on his back foot loses every fight of his career. As Teddy Atlas said, and I don't quote Teddy Atlas often or ever, every time that Tyson was confronted by a challenge, he lost. That's how he measures Tyson. That's not how I measure Tyson, but Bobby, give him credit. There's not a lot of guys that can be the opponent to an undefeated Olympic champion and take the fight to them and just dominate them the way he does in this fight. I thought he won almost every round.
Yeah, there were a lot of times that Andrew Maynard, he does look the part. Like, he does seem to give the style overall, the length. It does give Czyz some problems. He does have to figure some shit out. But Andrew Maynard, at least in the ring, reminds me a lot of like Anthony Hembrick. Anthony Hembrick was on the same 1988 Olympic team and had a very similar kind of like really good athletic, fast feet and hands type of style. But it's like you take him out of the comfort zone and they have no clue what the fuck to do.
Yeah.
And that's like they reacted similarly in those situations too. Anthony Hembrick against Booker T. Word, which was like a famous clip, where he's doing the dance, like the choreographed dance before the fight, and then he gets knocked out in like fucking 15
Oh
seconds or
yeah,
something.
I've
That's
seen.
that famous clip or whatever. And so, in any case, similarly, I think that Maynard, he knew what to do. He felt like he'd been in the situation. And then as soon as Ches started pushing him back and started kind of dealing him like punching back, he was like, "What? I'm the undefeated. I'm the undefeated guy who's supposed to be winning this. What the fuck am I doing here?" And
Yeah.
then he kind of just got pushed around, and you could tell that at times he was like, "Oh shit, I better fight my way out of this." It was the wrong move, dude. It was the wrong move. He continually Maynard, that is, made the wrong choice fighting Bobby Czyz in that fight tactically, where he was just trying to kind of fight his way out and go to the ropes, then fight his way off the ropes, go to the ropes, fight his way off the ropes. Bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that jumped out at me is Maynard seems like he's going for a jog, and Bobby's a sprinter. Bobby is willing to kind of sprint in there with his punches and his effort and his energy level. And Maynard never really seems to get out of a pace. Like he has one gear. And so he's kind of not lumbering because he's a long, lithe kind of guy, but it's curious that he doesn't have any sense of urgency in this fight as Bobby is pouring on pressure that he's not dealing with terribly well. He doesn't really adjust. He doesn't step up. He doesn't seem particularly concerned. Occasionally, that relaxed demeanor in the ring pays off. In the second round, at the end of the round, he lands a huge straight right, lead right hook combination, and Bobby takes it. I think it hurt him, but Bobby doesn't seem concerned about getting hurt. He just kind of has faith in his skills of recuperation and recovery. And that can intimidate you. Like when you've landed two huge shots flush, because Bobby's chin is really up in the air. He's got this big head that's up high, and it's boom, boom. And you just see him a little staggered, but it in no way diminishes his desire to win the fight. And you can see if it's a battle of will, Bobby has a lot more than what Maynard does, despite how accomplished Maynard is, and despite how Bobby's career has been derailed up to this point where he's being written off. So we're speaking positive stuff about Bobby. Give him his due.
Yeah, it's if we're doing the Teddy Atlas shit here, Bobby didn't sign the silent contract with Andrew Maynard. He didn't. he didn't agree to come in as the opponent. Like he didn't fight that way, and that was part of the problem, is that Maynard was not, I guess, prepared to handle an actual fight, and he didn't. And so yeah, finally, I guess not finally. I mean, he kind of beat him up a little bit, and in the seventh round, Maynard is pretty much done. You know what I mean? Like there's not really anything all that fancy to it. Ches kind of just clubs him into submission. Um, and it looks, you can tell what did they say? I can't remember exactly how they worded it on the broadcast, but toward the end they said that Maynard's corner was yelling at him and trying to get him to do X, Y, and Z, and he couldn't do it, and it just kind of crumbled.
Yeah, I mean, Maynard gets hurt in the fourth round. Bobby is stalking at this point. Like Bobby's really gone into a mode of kill. Like, I mean, like finish him off, which is weird because Bobby doesn't have that skill set. He doesn't have the attributes to close the show particularly effectively. So he just needs to go like his RPMs are just up that I need to finish this guy off and land 35 punches to stop him. And he's really only able to do it like, I mean, seventh round. I mean, the sixth round, Bobby also hurts Maynard. You see Maynard's legs get wobbly and he begins to look really wary. And by the seventh, I think before the round begins, um, the ref comes over and asks him if he wants to continue, and he just says he can't see with his eye. He doesn't want to fight. Like you can just see whatever Bobby is and whatever his expectations about what Bobby would be, he grossly underestimated, and he doesn't want to be there. Like and that's a credit to Bobby. Bobby's tenacity is Bobby is a very game fighter. And there's a lot of fighters that are in the Hall of Fame that did not have his kind of willpower and tenacity. I'll say that for him. Now, in terms of skills, uh, I don't know that Bobby's better than a journeyman, but yeah, it's weird. He's a weird guy to consider because when I'm watching, part of me is laughing, and then there's another part of me that I do feel respect for him. It's tough to be there in front of a crowd and fight an undefeated Olympic champion and pull it out after you've had a big loss where people have written you off. Imagine going back and watching this fight if you're Bobby, and within 30 seconds, the way to sum up your career is trying to salvage your career, like the one thing that's given your life meaning, and they're just totally dismissive of it because of one loss. But that's kind of who he was, and it's not, the announcer is not wrong either, but we're going to get a lot more Bobby.
And it's also fair to consider that going into the Andrew Maynard fight too, by this time Bobby Czyz has lost several times. He's lost twice to Prince Charles Williams,
Yeah,
um, who of course goes by
that's
Prince
true.
Charles because Prince Charles himself was popular in the tabloids during this time, so he picked up the Prince to fucking ride the wave. Worked too, but he loses twice to Prince Charles Williams. He loses to Dennis Andrews. No shame type of loss to Virgil Hill, who was a great light heavyweight.
Really good.
But I mean, also, I think that this series of losses also demonstrated once again that the sort of kind of cream of the crop or whatever, the better fighters at light heavyweight were still better than Bobby Czyz, and that the reason he was able to get that title earlier on was because the division was not good and was kind of building itself back up again, so going into that Maynard fight, that is. So it was, kind of understandable that he would be seen as an opponent for Andrew Maynard, but he overcame it. He defeated an undefeated Andrew Maynard, and so going forward, though, it was pretty clear that you know you mentioned talking about the Donnie Lalonde fight. I was surprised you wanted to talk about him beating up your Canadian homeboy. I don't know, man.
Fuck Donnie Lalonde. I mean, I can't stand him. But yeah, I mean, Lalonde obviously had a huge fight with Leonard in terms of the money that was up for that. I mean, I don't think anybody looks back at it and goes, "Oh, what an important fight." But it was just interesting to see Lalonde on this resume. And you're totally right. I just forgot about those other four losses that he'd had. So more credit to Bobby for putting up the effort that he did in this one than even what I was giving him. But yeah, I mean, Bobby's going to go on. Um, After this, I mean, Lalonde is on there. Oh, do you remember Tim Tomaszek? I remember that guy. Like,
I do. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that didn't Tommy Morrison
yeah, that's
kick
where
his
I
ass at
saw
some
him.
point?
I didn't know that Bobby Czyz fought him, but Czyz stopped him in 5 rounds in his second to last fight. That's amazing. I mean, that guy, 53-12 in his career, like, and his nickname was the Doughboy. What the hell happened to that guy? Um,
There you
so
go. Go on the search in Wisconsin for Tim Tomaszek to see where he's up to.
well, and it's interesting too, because I mean, as soon as Bobby is trying to kind of cash out, like he's just trying to find some kind of payday with the end of his boxing career, it's not going to be in the light heavyweight or really cruiserweight division. So, I mean, somehow he beats Donnie Lalonde. I guess Lalonde must have been pretty damn old at that point. I'm curious how many fights Lalonde. Well, no, Lalonde kept going too. Geez, I mean, all these guys just never stop. So yeah, Lalonde had about 7, 8 fights after Czyz and the unanimous decision. Ultimately, he lost to Virgil Hill at the end of his career. But Czyz moves up to the heavyweight division. Shows you how much confidence he had as a heavyweight that he fights Tim Tomaszek as his first opponent. I mean, I don't think the world offered an easier opponent than the Doughboy. And from there, I mean, just two more sort of nondescript. Jeff Williams wins the unanimous decision, TKO victory against Richard Jackson. I
Action
don't,
Jackson.
yeah. So Jackson, I don't know, had much of a resume, particularly up to that point. And
He
then he's
was
just,
he was undefeated but hadn't fought like anybody.
yeah. I mean, they're fighting in, I think, Biloxi. Like, I mean, they're, Czyz is kind of off the map at this point. Like, nobody is really thinking that Czyz who's now 33 years old, is on the brink of a sort of George Foreman-like last chapter of prominence. But he becomes an opponent for Holyfield, where I think Holyfield's people must have just thought, how could we not showcase that Holyfield in no way is spent? We're going to fight, Bobby Czyz, this blown up little guy. For once, Holyfield is going to be way bigger than his opponent. I mean, at that point, Holyfield is coming off being stopped by Bo, a really tough victory against Mercer, losing to Michael Moore, the first Bo fight, or rather the second Bo fight, Alex Stewart, and then the first loss of his career to Riddick Bowe. So I mean, Holyfield is in his territory of just fighting everybody in wars. So you think, like, I get to go on cruise control against Bobby Czyz, like 5'9", no reach. This should be so easy to show everybody that I don't have any heart issues. I'm not at the tail end of my career. I'm up for fighting a big fight. And obviously pining for the Tyson payday that Tyson going to jail derailed. And it just goes so weirdly in this one from, I think, what anybody expected.
Yeah, dude, it was, I kind of, I guess, just in my mind always dismissed this fight as a fight where, Holyfield didn't really look very good, but he kind of beat Czyz up. It's not really what happened in there. I mean, like it's not like Bobby Czyz did great, but yeah, it was a very strange time, dude. The 90s was wild for the heavyweight division. Some of the wildest shit that's ever happened in the heavyweight division. Almost all of it happened in the 1990s, to be honest. The like you said, the Holyfield was coming off the third Bow fight, which was I think it was the only one of their fights that didn't have a world title on the line, but it was like the most brutal of their fights because they were just, fairly spent against beating the shit out from beating the shit out of each other. Evander Holyfield was coming into the fight and saying, with the heart trouble issue, you got healed by Benny Hinn, all this sorts of crazy shit.
A
Uh,
faith healer, for those who don't know.
God, it's an extremely American phenomenon. Jesus Christ. Well, not only American, but certainly proliferated here. That being said, it was very strange, like you said, created a very weird atmosphere coming into this fight. A lot of people weren't really sure what to make of Evander Holyfield coming into this fight because he had had a struggle against the probably underrated Ray Mercer, the struggle against Michael Moore, beat the crap out of Riddick Bowe. You got the crap beaten out of him by Riddick Bowe. So a lot of people really didn't know what to say coming into this. And a lot of people, there was a lot of mainstream boxing media beating the drum about he needs to retire. What's he doing in there? Everybody was freaked out. And then on top of that, people were still tripped out about the Fan Man incident from a few years earlier, dude, which I don't fucking blame them. It's like people still being tripped out about 9/11 now, which is obviously not nearly as much destruction, but just in terms of like some fucking buddy infiltrating some shit and just going, holy fuck, how did that happen? Well, was pretty shocking. It's like I said, some of the wildest shit ever happened in the 1990s in the heavyweight division. So coming into this Bobby Czyz fight here, I think not a lot of people expected much out of Bobby Czyz. It was supposed to be the kind of fight where Evander Holyfield, I mean, like you said, dude, how many times did Evander Holyfield, like, was he like that much bigger than an opponent? Like, when you're fighting Evander Holyfield as a heavyweight and he's like the taller, longer, leaner guy, you're in trouble, dude. You're in fucking trouble. And
Yeah.
even so, Czyz did okay.
Yeah, it's a weird fight because I mean Holyfield, after beating Douglas, like he was one fight away from, I think, what was it, $8-9 million payday against Tyson if Tyson got through Douglas. That was signed and ready to go. He gets Douglas, who's a fat Douglas, in when Douglas defends his title. Douglas wins the biggest payday in the history of sports. What was it, 24 million?
Yeah, it was
To
something crazy.
just get fucking trashed by Holyfield. I mean, looks like shit. He doesn't care. Then George Foreman comes in, which is a sideshow. Its version of Tyson Jake Paul at that time. I'm not saying that that's my view, but that's how it was really
Yeah,
held
that
up
was the perception. Yeah.
as a sideshow. And how bad Holyfield looked in that fight relative to expectations, put George on the map as being taken seriously. He stopped being a sideshow as a result of, I think Holyfield said it's the hardest he's ever been hit in that fight. There's one time he was punched. He thought all his teeth had been knocked out when he got back to the corner. And he looked scared at times in that fight. Like he was holding Foreman a lot. I'm not saying he didn't deserve the victory, but you could see he was concerned
Right.
by what
George
was
was supposed to be a
happening.
joke.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of thought to be a joke. So after the Foreman kind of debacle from Holyfield's perspective, he fights Burt Cooper, which should be an easy fight. I mean, clearly it's like not a tune-up, but just like you can have one easy one with Cooper, almost gets knocked out. And you're going to see parallels with, I think, the Burt Cooper fight with Czyz, which is when Holyfield comes in and he has to lead the dance. And he wants to be I'm bigger than this guy, I'm taller, I have more reach, and I can show people that I'm a legit heavyweight and not taking steroids to be a heavyweight. He would not do that.
Never.
He doesn't really have an effective game plan to lead the dance. And Cooper, as a counterpuncher, who's a very heavy-handed fighter, hurts him badly. I think Holyfield, big intestinal fortitude to survive that, being stunned, being dropped, and all of that, but kind of lucky too. If Cooper landed one more shot while Holyfield was stunned, again, where would the heavyweight division have gone with Burt Cooper as champion? Jesus Christ. Fights Larry Holmes. I think everybody thought he'd do a lot better against Holmes than a unanimous decision, and then loses to Bo in an epic fight, but also takes a lot of damage. So in this fight, as much as we're going to kind of, I don't know, I mean, the fight begins with Larry Merchant saying, I can't help thinking that Czyz would do better analyzing this fight than fighting it. So expectations were low that Bobby Czyz was going to do anything against Evander Holyfield. But Bobby is back also to his lean to compensate for his lack of reach against Holyfield. So he has no balance. He has no center of gravity. And Holyfield does not know how to exploit it. Holyfield is just swinging, slugging the whole time for home runs against Bobby. And he's missing a lot. He's getting countered a fair bit. And it's not so much, I think, that Bobby is fighting this brilliant game plan. It's that Holyfield has no game plan. And he's just instinctually like, I want to show people that I can punch. And this is just the wrong guy to do it to, because Bobby has faster hand speed than Holyfield, which is kind of crazy. But I was shocked at how bad Holyfield looked. This showcase fight for Holyfield to look amazing. And I thought he looked as bad as I've ever seen him.
Yeah, he looks like somebody who's not really sure what to do, which makes sense, especially given what you were talking about with the attempts at countering and not really liking to lead. That was part of what made him effective in some of his best victories and some of his best fights, is his ability to take what he's given, counter off the other guy's offense and stuff like that. And he wasn't able to do that nearly as much against Bobby Czyz, who was, like you said, leaning down and making himself kind of a weird target. And I don't think Holyfield was really used to kind of punching down at him. He adjusted and he started going to the body fairly well, which is, even today, you don't even see heavyweights going to the body like hardly ever. But he was a good body puncher. And so toward the end of the first round, the only thing that really ruined it for Bobby Czyz in that first round was he kind of got caught up on the ropes, and Evander Holyfield was like, doing the extended flurry type of thing with Czyz on the ropes. He got caught a couple of pretty good shots too, and went to his corner looking like he wasn't really feeling super great. Recovered fairly well though, but the thing was, this is also part of what made Holyfield, really shit the bed here, was that after that little extended flurry, he was like done.
I think that's right. I mean, Czyz tries to trade with him the best he can, because that's like his one thing that he can do, is kind of the timing of when he's throwing to disrupt the offense of his opponent and get in some shots. But he's so horribly outgunned against Holyfield. And it's just fascinating to me because Holyfield, throughout his career, is an immensely gifted and courageous counterpuncher. But what this fight showcases is that he's far less accurate than I think people thought as a puncher. because I think he's got such big targets in front of him with these heavyweights when he's training. But with Bobby, he's missing a lot. And Bobby is right there to be hit. But Holyfield, I don't know what it was exactly, the punch selection, but he's throwing really wildly, and I don't quite know why. And he goes back to his corner. His corner is saying, stop loading up. Why are you doing this? There's no reason you have to do this. Like, you can just outwork him, outjab him. I mean, compare it to how he looked against Tyson. Tyson doesn't land anything really significant other than I think the first punch in their first fight. He throws like a lead right or something that Holyfield didn't expect. But Holyfield just handles him so beautifully, who's like way more explosive, way more evasive, way more powerful. With Czyz, who doesn't really have one punch power, Holyfield just doesn't know what to do to kind of contain him, dominate him, make him fight his fight. So he just looks really plodding. I mean, never tries to create an angle, just come forward, knock down somebody in front of me. And it's really weird because he's making Czyz look like Willie Pep at moments in this fight, and Czyz is doing nothing defensively. It's just kind of hands are up. Like, that's about his whole defense.
Yeah, it's you even hear, I think it's Don Turner, I want to say, in Holyfield's corner when he gets back to his corner, he tells him, "Hey, dude, he's standing right there." I don't think he said, "Hey, dude." That's just me being a fucking Californian. But he says, "Hey, he's sitting right there. You don't have to like reach him, and you don't have to like slug. You don't have to, you could just pop, 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 bam, that type of shit. Like, make sure he's in spot and then unload." And they're saying like you're loading up way too much instead, and you could see that too. But it's almost like they said it to him a little bit too late because, like I said, after that extended flurry, he doesn't throw another extended flurry really during the fight. He gets a couple combinations in, but after that extended flurry, Holyfield's like done offensively in terms of like, really putting punches together.
Yeah. And I mean, Holyfield starts to look really fatigued. Um, the frustration is just really abundant on Holyfield's face. The corner is just really exacerbated about what is this approach that Holyfield's trying to do? Like, what are we doing here? This guy's not presenting any kind of threat. Why are you giving him the fight, in a sense, like giving away your energy, and nothing is being really productive? Like, what is the plan? And Holyfield just doesn't listen to anything. But finally, he the loading up thing and wailing on Bobby produces a standing 8 count, which Czyz, of course, objects. Shockingly, at the end of the second round, Holyfield somehow manages to headbutt a guy who's as short as Czyz is comparatively. I really
The
feel like
talent.
I really feel like he's with his head is one of the dirtiest fighters I've ever seen. It's such a constant thing. Um, but yeah, Holyfield, is getting frustrated, looks tired, but manages to land enough to get that standing 8 count. Um, and then in the fourth round, he looks so fatigued. Bobby starts landing at a pretty high percentage. Holyfield has very little defense. There are times where he gets landed flush, like Czyz lands some real shots, like a 1-2 in particular. That's embarrassing. It's embarrassing, like with a guy with no reach, just walking forward with a doom doom and tags him. And you're just thinking, if that was Riddick Bowe, if that was Tyson, like, how did Tyson not land anything? If Czyz can land a 1-2 with no feint, like nothing to set it up, just I'm just going to walk into you and throw two punches to your face. Um, and then we get this thing where Czyz is talking about his eyes having some kind of foreign substance, and none of that is ever substantiated. The referee tests it out by taking it off of the glove and rubbing it into his own eyes. There's no effect, no impact. And I think Bobby has maintained to this day that it was hot sauce or something, Tabasco sauce. Just bizarre.
I will say, all right, so yeah, like it's a funky claim to make, obviously, and it's not the first time either. There have been numerous fighters who have, like, for instance, Chris Bird. said that I think both of the Klitschko's, he said that both of the Klitschko's put something on their gloves when they fought him, and that, he's like, he couldn't see and all that type of shit. Part of it was he was getting the crap kicked out of him against Vladimir in particular. But, there have been numerous fighters who have said things like that. And Ches did say that here. I think it was like before the fourth round started. He said his face was hot and something was burning his eyes. And they were going, what? Whatever, just try to get through it or something like that. And they said something to the ref, but he went on and it wasn't really a problem per se, at least during the fight. He got caught some shots after that. Like, the replay actually, right after he said, oh, my face is burning or whatever, they showed a replay from the previous round. And something I noticed was that during the replay, actually, one of Holyfield's shots missed, and the tape goes like that across Chez's eyes, which I've never been laced or taped or whatever you want to call it in a fight. And I didn't have very many, so I didn't have any experience like that. So I couldn't say, but I can't imagine it would feel very good, especially with that, like, Johnson and Johnson type porous tape. That shit is scratchy. So I could imagine that could have done something potentially. I don't know. But regardless, yeah, you don't really see there's no point at which anybody looks like they're having anything on their gloves. And on top of that, one thing to note here in these like accusations, these instances where there's accusations about a fighter putting something on a glove or a fighter's corner putting something on the glove. Dude, the gloves are getting grappled about and smushed and touched against each other so much that you would also have shit in your own eye at some point. Like, it's almost guaranteed. So if that were the case, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for that to actually happen. But regardless, point is, Holyfield doesn't look great offensively anyway. Ches fights okay in the fourth round. It's not the kind of stuff that Ches actually lands a number of clean punches in round 4 that I noted, but it's not the kind of stuff where you're thinking, oh, well, Holyfield's in any sort of trouble. He still doesn't really look bothered by anything that Ches is landing, but Ches is landing.
Yeah, I mean, the fifth round, there's a Bobby chant. I mean, at MSG, like not joking. I
It's
mean,
finally the
Bobby,
matinee idol.
yeah, the matinee idol who showed up to this fight wearing a Menza towel, like a Tyson ripoff, like white towel that's torn up. It looks terrible on him.
His
He
ring
comes
walk song is fucking Eye of the Tiger, which
by
is
the
like
Tiger.
the most fucking,
Yeah,
come
it's
on.
just everything is awful. And yeah, Holyfield is looking so terrible that Bobby has won over the crowd at this point, taking a beating where Holyfield is landing 53% of his punches. And the most damage that Bobby has is from an allegation of Tabasco sauce. It looks terrible. It looks so
No,
bad
it's
for
not a good look
Holyfield
for Holyfield.
that Tyson is just thinking, okay, we need to set up whoever we were going to fight next, get Holyfield in there so I can just knock him out in a round. And odds makers, I mean, what did they have that fight at? It was like 25-1 or
Yeah, it was
something.
something pretty obscene like
It
that it
was
opened at.
gigantic. Holyfield looked that terrible here. And as the eye thing is becoming what is going to stop the fight, you hear Jim Lampley say shades of Cassius Clay and Sonny Liston at Miami Beach. Oh, that's
Woo,
so
now that's a reach.
yeah. Yeah, I think in terms of boxing historical importance, that's a weird comparison, a weird analog, but okay. So Holyfield looks, this is disastrous, but in a weird way, it's the best thing that ever happens to him in terms of setting up the Tyson fight and utterly annihilating Tyson. I mean, just completely dominating a bloated, overconfident, um, you know, all of the hubris that Tyson has, where he's not training properly and just assumes he can just walk over people or scare them to death, just tailor made for what Holyfield brought. But who would have thought it on the basis of this fight against Bobby Czyz? Where you like, who would think that Czyz would put on a better performance than Tyson? But I think he did against Holyfield.
There's a moment, so in round 5, there's a moment too where kind of not so much out of nowhere because Ches actually did okay in round 5, but there's a moment where he caught Holyfield with like this like
Jab
telegraphed.
right hand.
Yeah, like ridiculous from all the way back here, right hand, like boom. And Holyfield almost looked at him like, "You got me with that one." You know,
I
like
had
he
that
looked at him
noted
like,
too.
"Okay, all right."
I had it
But
noted
it's a
too.
bad look.
No, because you just know it's like they said with Ali and Foreman, right? Where it's like Norman Mailer, you remember in When We Were Kings, made the point that you just would not throw to a professional fighter lead right hands because it would be an insult in sparring to do so. Holyfield getting hit by that series of punches by somebody like Ches, that small, it's really embarrassing that you're at a level where that's like your defense is so non-existent. And even when Holyfield was cracking Ches, there's a couple times where Ches said, "Good shot, nice
Yeah,
shot."
yeah, that's true. I forgot about that. That's right.
He's commentating more than he's fighting.
That's yeah, and they even noticed it because he goes bam and hits him with like a real nice right hand. And he goes like, "Yeah, nice shot," or something like
Yeah,
that.
it's hilarious. And
Oh
so,
man,
for Ches, it looks like his career is over at this point. But 2 years later, he comes back
I
in.
I did want to say one thing really
Sure.
quick, and I know that we've been joking about Bobby. I only wanted to say, and I'm not saying I agree with or believe the accusations about anything on the gloves because I was just joking about that a moment ago. I will only say that when the camera did do a close up on his eyes did look really red and irritated. Like they
No
they
question.
they honestly did.
No, no, no,
What
no
caused
question.
that? It could have been fucking punches. I don't know. You know, like you get punched in the eyes and your eyes get red. But I'm just saying they did look red.
Well, and I mean, Merchant, the first thing he said is like, why wasn't it maybe sweat, the salt to sweat? And
I've
I
been a
would just
fighter
say,
for something years. Yeah.
well, and I would just say, I mean, I don't know what it was either. I mean, I've heard Bobby actually talk about this, that when they did an investigation into the substance, that they misplaced the glove for 2 days. So he said, where's the chain of evidence? It's where, it becomes O.J. Simpson trial of the century territory. But I will say, I remember on several occasions sparring where sweat did get in my eye and my eyes got bloodshot and it was
It burns.
incredibly painful and it burned and I didn't see anything from Bobby's eyes that tells me it wasn't just that. It's just I think Bobby wouldn't allow for that probably. But I would say I've experienced it. I've seen it on many people. Sweat can absolutely do what was happening to Bobby in that fight. I mean,
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, imagine what was flowing out of Holyfield's system with all of the drugs he fucking Evan Fields was taking. Imagine those chemicals getting into your goddamn eyes.
Yeah, no shit.
So yeah, let's go ahead 2 years to Connecticut, the Mohican. What is it? The Mo.
Mohegan Sun.
So yeah, um, boy, Bobby, what were you thinking that you were going up against Corey Sanders, who, I mean, at that point, Corey Sanders had, I mean, Corey Sanders' entire career is 42 and 4, 31 knockouts. I mean, this is a guy who just annihilated Vladimir Klitschko and then got just slaughtered by Big Brother shortly after. I guess he lost to Rahman, got knocked out there. Nate Tubbs got knocked out, but so just two losses going into the Ches fight.
Yeah, he kind of had a bit of a head scratching career, Corey Sanders, that is, because he was um good sized, but not huge for a heavyweight, but was number one a southpaw, number two a puncher. And you get any southpaw puncher, that's a nightmare style. But then he was also very skilled, had really fast hands, like deceptively fast.
Really fast.
Because this fool looked like a Super Mario Brothers. He looked like nothing. Like he'd look like you wouldn't even think twice about stepping to this guy in a bar, and then he would fucking kill you. And but he had a very strange kind of career trajectory because he was doing well against Hasim Rahman in that fight. It was a bit of a war, and then just kind of gassed out, and Rahman clubbed the shit out of him. And I want to say it was like 7 or 8 rounds, and he got stopped on his feet. Nate Tubbs, these are the kind of fights where like you would expect somebody who was a top heavyweight to defeat somebody like a Nate Tubbs, and it's had a bit of a kind of a Buster Douglas type career. He's losing to fighters he had really no business losing to, and then cashes in later on in a big upset. But during this time when Corey Sanders is kind of making a comeback, fighting at Mohegan Sun, which was a lovely casino and a fun venue, just not a very big venue that I don't even think they really use for boxing very much anymore. But nonetheless, during the late 90s and early 2000s, they had a whole bunch of fights at Mohegan Sun, and this was one of them. And Bobby Czyz also kind of like on a comeback, as it were, but far less of a comeback because he was already a stubby heavyweight and had already kind of basically ridden the loss to Holyfield as hard as he could. He got as much mileage out of it as he could potentially get. Got to get back in the ring now. Was the wrong dude against Corey Sanders.
Yeah, horrible choice because Sanders is an incredibly experienced amateur as well. He had almost 200 fights as an amateur, won, I think, like 180 and 10 or something like that, but like a huge amateur career. So tremendously experienced going into this. And I agree, he's not just a devastating puncher, but as he did against Klitschko, really dangerous, like with how many punches he's throwing. If he doesn't hit you with the second, he's willing to throw 5, 6, 7, 8 punches in a row coming forward. He moves deceptively well as like closing distance. Like he's a dangerous guy. And one little interesting feature about him is when he won the title, it was the same time that Roy Jones Jr. won the title, and he really actively tried to get a heavyweight fight with Jones, which I don't like that fight for Jones. I don't think Jones would have taken those punches well at all from somebody that big and tall and long. Um, I don't know. I mean that would be a weird place to go if he was the first one to knock out Jones as opposed to Tarver. You know, it's interesting these sort of counterfactuals as they present themselves. But instead he gets Bobby Czyz in Connecticut and Jesus, just I mean, from the get-go, Czyz at 220 pounds. Sanders takes about 20 seconds to measure him. But really just, okay, how am I just going to take this guy's head off? And after 20 seconds, he opens up with a dizzying flurry. I mean, his hand speed is exceptional for a guy his size. He looks like some 1920s golfer or something. Like he's got this big mustache. He just has a weird
He
throwback
actually
look.
was a semi-pro golfer, believe it or not.
He looks it, and he
He
also
really was.
and he just looks like if you put like he has a face that looks like it's never looked at a cell phone in his life. He looks like he's from a totally different era. Like he's a black and white kind of photograph of a person. He doesn't look like a modern person. So it's funny to see Czyz with whatever the hell Czyz looks like, the matinee idol on what planet, I don't know. But to see these two come, you know, in a collision course where I think it takes him about 20 shots, Sanders, to knock Czyz down. And these are such brutal shots. Like any one of these shots is about as bad as Tarver knocking out Jones, that shot. And Czyz takes 20 of them. Jones took one. So I'll give that to Czyz. But Jesus, if you're a supporter of Bobby Czyz, do you really want him to show you how tough he is by taking 20 of these shots from this fucking huge guy who's punching in really nice, crisp combinations and from different angles? So Bobby collapses after 1 minute and 9 seconds and takes a knee. Corey comes blazing out, and you know, you hear the announcers talk about Czyz, why he took this fight. It was that I didn't believe that he was tough. I didn't think he had heart. And he's actually told the referee, as only a Mensa candidate can do, I may take some punishment in this fight, but I'm going to wear him out. So don't you stop this fight prematurely. And within 20 seconds, it's like, there's no reason this fight should take place. Bobby has zero chance. If they fought 10,000 times, Bobby loses 10,000 times. It's brutal.
Style-wise, that leaning this is where it's really a detriment to a fighter where, you know, obviously bobbing and weaving and those kinds of things, that's textbook kind of punch avoidance, but at the same time, you do it in a way that's strategic, and you do it in the right way at the right time, etc. And if you have a fighter who's able to come across with his punches or throw hooks, throw kind of laterally, the problem is that when you're doing that kind of leaning, you get hit in the temple, you get hit toward the back of your ear, that kind of shit, and those punches fuck you up. Like, obviously, punches to the nose, to the chin, to the eyes, those punches hurt too. I'm not saying they don't. But in terms of like taking your legs away, Bobby Czyz is already late in his career, has fought a long time, doesn't have the greatest legs at this point anyway. But, those kinds of punches really mess up your equilibrium. And that's kind of what we saw. And on top of that, Sanders is a massive puncher. He's catching Bobby clean as he's doing this leaning thing against the ropes. And so that's almost as it seems as much why he takes that knee in the first round, because he's just getting fucking whacked right around this temple. Has to take a knee, and he does. But about a minute into the second round, he gets hurt again. And basically, Ches, to his credit, he's trying to throw back. He's trying to kind of keep Sanders off of him, but he's getting caught between his shots because Sanders is quicker, he's sharper, just a bigger puncher, and he's looking down on him. Like, he's not even remotely scared about anything Ches is throwing back. And so, you see Sanders again send Ches down. They wisely stop it, and he's sitting there complaining. And it's a lot of these losses, not just the Sanders fight, not just the Holyfield fight, but Prince Charles Williams too, earlier in his career, and then a close decision to Dennis Andries. He could say after almost all of these fights, like, I didn't really lose those fights. I didn't deserve to lose those fights. Something happened. There was some outside force that did something. Oh, like in my life, I was going through a lot of personal shit. He's got something like a quick response for pretty much all these fights. There was something on his gloves, fucked up my eyes. Oh, against Prince Charles Williams, they stopped it in the corners. Was cut over my eyes, was swollen, that type of shit. And it's like, why? If they'd let it go on, I would have knocked him out in the next round. All of those sorts of like, quick response excuses for all of these losses. And I mean, like, some of them, there might be like an inkling of truth to them. And yeah, it did look kind of weird against Holyfield. And I do wonder like what exactly happened. But, you know, who is going out of their way to, commit felonious assault and put some fucking poisoned substance on Holyfield's gloves and endanger their future fucking prison for Bobby Czyz, with all due respect,
Oh,
So
it's true.
it's a lot of weird fucking excuses.
Well, and I think, like the number one thing, I read this the other day in HR, that is the biggest detriment to you getting hired is a lack of self-awareness. And that's why Bobby's so funny, is there's just this overestimation of his importance in the sport as an announcer, as a fighter, and it just does make you kind of laugh. Like everything he's leading with does not point to ego, it just points to insecurity, which, if you're a supporter, it doesn't feel very nice, but it also is just it's just kind of funny to watch the man operate and move through the world. And in this fight, it's just what could possibly drive you to think, looking at this guy who, like, somebody's tough as Corey Sanders, somebody who's going to die shielding their daughter from bullets, and say, I question his heart, I question his chin. And you are Bobby Czyz with, probably a 1.5 foot deficit of reach against this guy who you've seen what he can do. You've seen him fight, he had fought Klitschko at this point, right?
Not yet, no. He
Not
was a
yet.
couple years away. But
Okay.
he had fought like in several televised fights by this point.
Yeah, I mean, he's a devastating puncher. Like if you go in and you're available to be hit, you are going to be knocked out fast against Corey Sanders. Like anybody, like that kind of punching power, and how confident he is and how experienced. I just don't know what could possibly possess a Czyz to think this is a smart opponent for me to take on at this point in my career. And yeah, it's a savage beating. And I mean, at the end, I guess you can either say it's to his detriment or to his credit, is he's taking such a pummeling that the announcer says, "What? How is he standing?" Like those are some of the last words that were ever said about Bobby as a fighter. How is he standing? Well, okay, so good for you, Bobby. You were so arrogant to think that you could do something against this guy, and you had enough balls and enough of a chin to stand there just taking a fucking horrific beating. Awesome. But I, I think you wonder with this guy because clearly people thought enough of him as an announcer that that would have been a really good career for him to keep going. I didn't like him as an announcer. I found him really annoying because I felt like he was just trying to be self-aggrandizing rather than call the fight. It was always about Bobby. But I mean he got a job at a major network and was a respected commentator, but 4 DUIs?
Well, and that's what kind of that's if it were just kind of like that he lacked self-awareness, that can be quirky. That can be fun, that can be endearing. Lacking self-awareness, it's not a great thing, but in small doses, it's okay and it's kind of funny or whatever. But the other shit, the sexual assault, the DUIs, or the sexual assault accusation, I should say, because I don't know too much about it, but nonetheless, the DUIs, this is what takes it into a territory where it's not, a admirable, endearing, good guy type of thing. It takes it into a different territory.
Yeah,
And
it's
with the
dark. It's dark.
and with the commentating, I was never really a fan either. I understand why people could be. I know a lot of fighters. I'm sorry, a lot of people enjoy when fighters or ex-fighters are commentators, and a lot of time it works very well. In this case, like you said, I think there were a lot of instances where he tried to shoehorn his own experience as a fighter into what he was calling when it really was not necessary. We see the same thing with Andre Ward.
Yeah.
We were just talking about Andre Ward earlier. It's the same lack of self awareness in terms of, people don't want to hear that. They don't care. You know what I mean? But that being said, also, there was there was an article a little while back written about him where they were talking about his classic call against with Holyfield Tyson too, and I was like, was that a classic call from him? And they're like, yeah, he uttered the famous line, "I can't believe he bit him," and I'm like,
Jesus.
what? That's hardly a it happened, or down goes Fraser. you
No,
know
he never had a quotable line. And the other thing too
I,
is
I
while
I just thought that was fucking precious as fuck.
oh, awful. And while Tyson, when he moved to Showtime and Bobby called all his fights, Bobby was riding his dick the entire time, acting as if Tyson was like Sugar Ray Robinson post prison. And it was clearly just, I want to be on board. I want to be a PR guy for this network, our guy who we've invested money in. He was like, there was nothing noteworthy about any of his calls in those fights or his criticism or insights about anything. Like it was just be a huckster. Like that's what it felt like to me. Like especially with the Tyson stuff, was Tyson was the greatest thing ever. I mean, watch the first Tyson Holyfield fight where you see him going from no matter what is happening in front of him in terms of what Holyfield's doing to Tyson, he's in complete denial. When it's impossible to be in denial, he switches completely the other way. Like he's just very
See, I knew it. I knew this was going to happen. Yeah.
yeah, it's just embarrassing. It's not it's just tough to watch. I like he is painful because you kind of if you don't want to cry and let him in emotionally, you have to develop this barrier where you start laughing, which I don't feel great about, but I mean I'm wearing a t-shirt that he didn't make any money from, so you know, blame the man.
Blame Bobby. Now, I think we kept it fairly straight. I don't think we went too far off the deep end with the hatred or anything like that. We kept it pretty factual. I mean, honestly.
I mean, imagine if I actually put away an entire bottle of Bob Dylan's Knocking on Heaven's Door whiskey.
Yeah, I would have ended this a while ago, dude. I would have ended this a fucking while ago. Yeah, after a little bit, I was like, he's not really acting drunk. I wonder if he's actually drinking anything because that would fuck me. I mean, I
Oh
can
my
drink. That would
God.
fuck me up like real bad. If I were drinking out of a margarita glass of fucking whiskey, I'd be fucked.
No, I was looking for a bottle before we started, and because as I said, I am telling the truth that I've reviewed a bunch of whiskeys and stuff for
I remember
Bloomberg.
you said you reviewed Proper 12. It really is
Yeah,
shit.
and some other stuff too. And I just say to any P, once you review something once for a major place, you're on PR list to send you stuff.
Yep.
So I get like I've had like 14 high-end pillows that I've been trying to cure my insomnia, and I just say, I'm very happy to pitch it to my editor, but in the meantime, send the samples. Send the samples. And so yeah, like I'll say yes to anything from these PR people when they send samples. So I had one bottle left that I hadn't given away because I give them all away, the alcohol. And and I just thought, what would you do if I looked as if I was drinking three-quarters of a bottle of
I just
bourbon?
let it go. I was like, let's see where this goes.
No, I even smelling like I dumped it last night. There was like this much left in it from I think somebody who was drinking it who came over. And even that, like I had to rinse the thing out 3 or 4 times to not have the smell of bourbon contaminate iced tea. Like I like lemon unsweetened iced tea. Like I throw that shit back. But the smell of
You
bourbon
just
to
pissed
me,
off every Southern listener right now.
no, I mean, I respect them all, but I come from a family of devoted alcoholics who've drunk themselves to death. But I
No, I
can't
mean with the
stand the smell.
unsweetened tea. They get mad at you for having your tea unsweetened.
Oh, that's interesting. You're supposed to have it sweet?
In the South, they do sweetened tea. I don't like sweetened tea personally, but
It's fucking diabetes in a cup. Like I'm not.
well, have you seen the South? With all due respect, Southern listeners, I think y'all would agree too.
Here's a question I have. When did non-Southerners start all like ubiquitously using y'all? It's
I
become very popular.
I don't know. I think that it's like kind of, I mean, I think it's kind of like dude in the sense that it's like neutral.
I mean, it is now, but do you think it's a pronoun issue?
Not really. Not from what I
Like
understand, it's not.
it's not like saying like, "Hey guys," and people taking offense at that. So instead you say y'all, nobody could take offense
Yeah.
that way.
Well, I mean, I don't know if that's why people do it, but I think that it's helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Bobby Czyz. Let's throw
y'all,
another drink out for Bobby Czyz. You know? No, look, I do sometimes imagine. Like I'm not sitting here fucking stewing about it, but I do sometimes imagine, and I think what would happen if the actual Bobby Czyz did actually hear our podcast and was like, "Wait, what the fuck?" I do think about that every so often. Where I'm kind of like, if that were me and I heard that, what would I? If it were me, I'd probably laugh. If I'm being honest, like I probably would laugh. I don't know, because it's not like we're saying things that are malicious or untrue. They're true, but I'd probably laugh. But I have thought about that.
I mean, the mocking the Mothers Against Drinking Driving, supporting him for imposing legislation about looking at driving records. I don't know if he'd be thrilled with that. I mean, I
Of
would say,
course, we're taking the piss. Yeah,
yeah, no. But I mean, I'm thinking we had Ike Biabucci, the real Ike Biabucci, respond to one of our videos, and
that's true.
I mean, I don't think it's libelous to be like that guy is fucking crazy. What he's been reported to have done, or why he did some of the things he did. And he even his write-up was so fucked up that I'm 99% sure it was him. It was very weird.
Oh, it was him because he has videos on that account of him on
Yeah,
YouTube.
so it's him. And I was trying to think like who have I ever profiled that took issue with the profile? And I've only had it once, which was Shannon Briggs.
Really?
He was the only one. I did it for it was like the ESPN's The Undefeated. And he read it once and I thought it was very complimentary because I was kind of saying like this guy is in on the gag of being Shannon Briggs. Like he's totally in on like Don King. He knows what you think about him, but in terms of promoting his brand, he's way bigger as a sort of the equivalent of like a TikToker with trolling Klitschko and all of that than
Yeah,
he
and he
was.
puts it on.
Yeah. And he's brilliant at it. And this weird Let's Go Champ is sort of his version of Only in America with Don King. So I was really celebrating him as a PR guy, but like it's fucking clownish absurdity. And he read it once and he sent me a text and was like, I really appreciate this. Thanks, man. And then an hour later, he was like, on second thought, this kind of reads like you're saying I'm a complete clown. And I was like, but you are a clown. It's just it's a brilliant character.
Yeah, you're trying to get a title shot not by defeating good fighters, but by being loud and boisterous and getting in his face and following him around the globe. That
Yeah, it was weird. It was the only time where somebody took issue with the presentation, but there was no like specific substantive issue that they were criticizing about it. Just like, why are you saying I'm fun? Like, are you laughing at me? Or are you laughing with me? And I was like, clearly I'm laughing with you. You're in on the joke. But it's a weird feeling. Like, I mean, that's not the same thing as us doing the Ches thing, because like it clearly is for fun. But I mean, like Kazakhstan in many instances had huge formal complaints about Sacha Baron Cohen
they're
depicting
still
it.
pissed about that shit.
They're still pissed about it. And then the national anthem is about fermented horse urine and all of that. And he's like, this is a joke about Americans not knowing anything outside of the country. It could have been any former Soviet country. It has like there's nothing of this that has to do with Kazakhstan. Nothing. And still they protested and I think at some major event they played the Borat version of the Kazakhstani national anthem instead of the real anthem. Like it was amazing.
I mean, and it has not aged super great, obviously, and with recent news, it's aged even worse for Sacha Baron Cohen.
Yeah.
But that being said, it is clearly a commentary, which is, I think, what we're doing here, even though some people might not understand it. And in any case, not to belabor the point, but I have wondered about what would happen or what he would think or whatever. Look, dude, if Bobby actually listened to this or watched this and wanted to contact or whatever, I would never turn it down or anything. I would listen to what whomever wanted to say or had to say about it. But clearly, the point I think has been made that we are having fun, and I think that given what has happened, and given what has transpired, the fucking transgressions here, the fun is okay.
I mean, you're my line with it, because I agree with you about I don't want to bully people. I've not taken any jobs or like as I say, I've profiled a lot of people. A lot of people. I've interviewed a lot of people. None of them have come back at me and said you were unfair or you did anything untoward in terms of
Yeah, or
representing.
lied or made something up or
Yeah,
anything. Yeah.
I've never had it. And so it
Which is a very
allowed.
important portion of profiling people, of course.
Yes, and all the people you interview about them, so that I can always say, whenever I have somebody who says, I've never gone on record about something, I can say, you can investigate anybody that I've ever dealt with, ever professionally, any publishing house, any magazine editor, or whatever, you cannot find one thing against me. So that you can trust if something's off the record, it's off the record. If something is going to be a depiction, I've been critical of people, but I've been fair so that if you fuck somebody, and I've had people say things off the record that would have been tremendous to publish, tremendous, like especially with fighters where you meet some very prominent fighters and they're like, I've got a mistress there, I've got a mistress there, I've got a mistress, and you're like, I just met your wife. Don't, why are you telling me this? But I think with Bobby is if you put yourself out there to society, nobody forced you to be a public figure, then it's part of the game. I mean, I think it's sort of like American Idol. Like if you go up there and you think you're a fantastic singer and you suck, I didn't I didn't force you to go on stage to make a fool of yourself. So am I allowed to say, you sound like a fool? This is really embarrassing. And your parents or friends saying you're great at this lack of self-awareness is really funny. So you get your exposure, but that's you elected to be there. I didn't force you to do it. So with Bobby, we make fun of Menza. You're gonna wear a towel with Menza on it and then have 4 DUIs. Like, I'm sorry, but it's kind of funny, like, to recognize the lack of a correlation between apparently intelligence and judgment. But I also I agree with you. Like, there was a profile that came out probably a few years after we started this joke about Blame Bobby, where he's packing groceries in a supermarket in New Jersey, and he's still drinking. He's in denial that he's an alcohol. I think he said, "I'm not an alcoholic," and they mention he's drinking wine. Like, I don't feel good that that's where he ended up. Like, I don't wish ill on the guy, but he just can't open his mouth without saying something where I just slap my forehead, like, just don't put a microphone in front of this fucking guy. But I feel that way a lot too. Like you're saying, like, Andre Ward is kind of one of the only people I've profiled where I find him very frustrating as a public figure when he talks about things. I just don't get it. But but I mean, I was texting him the other day asking about the Jake Paul Tyson thing and saying, like, did they ever come to you to offer and stuff? Like, I really respect him, but I do think his lack of self-awareness about certain elements of why he didn't get more popular are kind of funny in a way.
The line between rightly lampooning, commentating, whatever you want to call it, the line between correctly calling things out and bullying or being mean or malicious or, however you would like to word that, it can be a fine line. And sometimes you cross the line without even knowing it. Sometimes, I mean, I don't want to say that in order to like absolve myself of responsibility of things that I say, because I have been mean and I have said things like that, of course. But I do think that it is a fine line and it's tough to find that line sometimes. And it's even tougher to find it with complex characters who have exhibited traits that we, like we said today, are very admirable and that we really appreciate, but also on the flip side of it are easy to kind of, poke holes at. So it can be complicated, but I'm all for dipping my toe at the line.
And I think with boxing, the other thing is that it fundamentally is tragic. Like, it's an arena of tragic people in a tragic endeavor where there's no way to avoid damage. There's massive exploitation. Like, it's sad. It's a sad kind of place where people are coming from sad backgrounds, traumatic backgrounds. And because of that, there's an immediate sort of emotionality about it that's not present in the other games. The other games
Hmm.
feel sort of static by comparison.
Yep.
Whereas boxing, like, it's not that you're searching where is the story, it's where is there not the story.
Right.
Everywhere is stories. And anybody who's drawn to violence has some weird connection to it that's a little perverse and distinctly theirs. So
It really is just a question of how much you're willing to admit that. And a lot
yeah,
of people are not.
well, that's it. I think that that's it. So there's like an element of sort of like I was thinking about, I went to Cuba a few months ago and it was so terrible going back. I've never seen it so bad. I will never go back. And I was thinking, at what point when you go to a country that's really under duress, that's really struggling, which it always was, like, since I've been going since 2000, is at some point it's like when you go to the zoo as a kid or an aquarium, but especially a zoo, where it's like, oh my God, I'm seeing all these amazing animals that I've only seen in books. When do you stop looking at them and start looking at yourself through their eyes in a prison? I don't know when that is, but at some point we all feel that, and we can imagine what it would be like to be trapped. Like, the worst punishment we can inflict on somebody, arguably even worse than executing them, is to just put them alone in solitary confinement with their own thoughts, is isolation. And yet we inflict this on magnificent, animals that can fly or run incredibly fast or whatever. Um, there's something about that with boxing where it's like when you're a little kid and you look at these guys, they're like the bravest, strongest, toughest. They can do what we're so afraid to do. But when you meet them, like these are broken people. And yet because of that, it creates a certain tension that you can only deal with if you're open to the humor of it too, because they're immensely funny people. But the
Right.
jokes are jokes that cut. Like
Yeah.
any
That's
any fucked up place that you go to, any place that's really fucked up, invariably the people have the best sense of humor.
and just to briefly kind of uh go forward with that analogy, stand-up comics or comedians,
Yeah, same
some
thing.
of the most fucked up and broken people you could possibly imagine, making light of situations that you can't make light of, but that's the entire point. And so a lot of boxing fans and people involved in boxing, they never reach that point. That zoo transition, they never get there. They always see these heroic, poetic, epic, legendary type of, and that is there. That is there. But there's an entire underbelly to it that they never even look at. And so but the underbelly is, which is also always there, is something that you and I on this show in particular have never been afraid to acknowledge. And that's almost kind of like a burden. And the way that we deal with that burden is comedy.
I think it is because I remember asking Roy Jones's wife, who I adored, and like all of his family, when I went to their house, and Jones was late 2, 3 hours or something. So I spent time with his wife and kids before he came home, which ended up being kind of the best thing that ever happened about that profile was just like, who are these people? What is their relationship to such a special character? Like our Michael Jordan of our sport, right? Like, I mean, as amazing as you could be at the sport, Jones, you could argue, was the best to ever do it. Certainly the best I ever saw do it while I've been alive. And for her, it was just when he fights a Lebedev and he gets knocked out in a way that you don't even want to watch. I'm the one who has to be there to pick up the pieces, and I don't even know when he wakes up, is it going to be the guy I married? Every time I can't get him to stop, and every time he wakes up, I don't know if it's ever going to be him again and or my kids will ever see their dad again. And suddenly you're just like, oh, it's not a sport. Like this is
So
this
you're
is
living in constant fear and anxiety, is what you're telling me.
and you
Oh,
can't stop him from this is what he's addicted to. This is the only thing, or this is the thing that gives his life the most meaning and vitality. And clearly that's true with Ches too. It's just Ches is not Roy Jones. So, it's like if you're watching a cab driver running every red light, you just be like, for what? Like you're just a cab driver. Like there's no award. You're never going to get recognition for being the world's greatest cab driver or whatever, but you just happen to be the craziest fucking guy who gets your fare to wherever they're going faster than any other cab driver. It's there's something about that that makes Bobby kind of funny in that he does have this delusion that I feel like whenever I've heard him interviewed, it's I'm in the New Jersey Boxing Hall of Fame. I'm in the Polish Boxing Hall of Fame. And he's like a quarter Polish. It's just stuff like that
on his
where it's,
father's side, obviously.
yeah, right. But there's just elements to the way he behaves where you're just like, oh, I mean, I heard this with Vivek how do you say it? Ramaswamy,
Hmm.
the guy who's running for president. Somebody that I've done some interviews with, who's interviewed me on his show on ESPN, Pablo Torre, was at Harvard with him. And he said, you want to know who Vivek was at Harvard? No matter what question was asked by the professors that we shared, his hand would go up and he would have this libertarian take to just piss everybody off. He just had to answer every single fucking question. And those kind of people are just really funny. Like, and yet if you were their wife or their friend, I think it would be terrible. It's the Charlie Chaplin observation to be on the banana peel and slip is tragedy. To watch somebody do it from a distance is hilarious.
It's that Schadenfreude, that that enjoying somebody else's pain or tragedy, and there we do a lot of that in boxing. We definitely do a lot of that in boxing for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and in essence, that's what we're paying to do. You know, they make how much money? I mean, unfortunately, Ches never made a lot of money, putting his life at risk and leaving him pretty damaged at this stage of his life. But it is, yeah, they are putting themselves on the stage to be evaluated, to entertain. Their suffering is fodder, and yeah, it's fucked up. Like I feel I've always felt very ambivalent about the sport. I love all the fighters, but I think the sport is pretty disgusting. It's so compelling for that very
I know
reason.
you can't, we can't separate. I know. Like you hate it, but you're like, fuck, I love it. I hate it. I love fuck, I love it. I hate
Yeah.
it though, but I love it.
But I mean, it's also like I know like eh, I'm sure some of us know people that are addicted to something and they say they hate it. I hate cigarettes. I hate drinking. I hate drug, whatever. I Boxing is sort of like hating ice cream. Like I know it's not good for me, but like it's fucking amazing. Like nothing else is like it. It's one of those things as opposed to I just hate it. So I think humor is just the lubricant, and somehow we landed on Bobby as our
Yeah,
favorite.
we're ending this show on lubricant.
Yeah. Oh, Bobby. Well, we wish you well anyway, Bobby. I mean, I bought a shirt with your, I think I'm going to throw it out after this, but,
You might as
or we
well
can give
just
it to a listener. We can give it to a
there you
listener if
go.
they want the shirt.
Yep. Use your DNA to clone little Brins.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, or maybe you can get it to Bobby.
There you go. Perfect. That he could rock the Blame Bobby shirt. That'd be perfect, actually.
Oh man. All right. Back to work next time. No more April
Yeah.
Fool specials.
Yeah. No, no, this is yeah, we had to just bust it out for April Fools, but hey, dude, it was work. We did do a little bit of work. We did a little bit of studying up, and we did do it in earnest. We did do it, with an open mind, or at least as open as our minds could be on the subject. So, Brent, I appreciate you doing that. For sure. It was a fun time.
We tried. We tried.
We did what we could. So hopefully you like the April Fool's joke and show everybody. But if you listened in, we do appreciate. I know it's been kind of slow. I don't know what the hell is with the audio and getting back on the podcasts. It's a process I don't fully understand, but I know they are coming back up. That being said, we appreciate you. Go ahead and subscribe to the audio podcast. If you watched on YouTube, subscribe there too. Leave us a comment, say hello, all those sorts of things. As far as social media goes, not really on X/Twitter anymore. I think Brent still is though, as Brinicio, Brinicio. But the Knuckles and Gloves podcast is on both Facebook and Instagram. So go ahead and check us out there. And Brent, we'll talk soon. Probably not about Bobby Czyz though.
You just got to find the right image for this to go up as our little iconic poster.
I'm sure I will. I don't know what yet, but I'm sure I will.
Blame
Yeah.
the man.
Oh, Bobby, we love you.
All
Later,
right. See
Brent.
you soon, man.